We may be a small island, but we have a rich and complex history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for lost pieces from our missing past.
A tiny, tiny coin.
Every element is there. This is just unbelievable.
In 2017, their investigations continue to fill in the gaps. Oh man! Wow! Bringing us closer to our ancestors than ever before.
What do you think of that, Roy?
In this programme, we showcase the best digs from the west of the UK.
Oh wow! That's rather lovely, Sean.
Each of the excavations has been filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for each exciting moment of discovery.
How does that feel, Rupert?
Yeah, pretty good.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can take a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this programme, I'm joining archaeologists in the West to share their biggest discoveries. Near Stonehenge, a lost prehistoric monument is transforming our understanding of Stone Age Britain. I mean, it looks like writing.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yes.
In Staffordshire, an incredible hoard of 2,500-year-old gold
The find of a lifetime, isn't it?
reveals our Iron Age ancestors' surprisingly continental tastes in jewellery.
That is absolutely beautiful.
In Repton, we come face to face with Vikings and discover some surprising new information about their bloodthirsty invasion of Britain. Are they female warriors?
They could be.
I come to Taunton, to the Museum of Somerset, to find out how the artefacts in this collection can help us broaden out those stories of our new discoveries from the West. Our first dig takes us to Avebury, deep in the heart of our most treasured prehistoric landscape. Over 5,000 years old, Avebury has the largest stone circle in the world, measuring more than 1 kilometre in circumference. It's part of a vast network of prehistoric burial mounds and monuments, including the world-famous Stonehenge. We used to think that this was just a landscape of sacred sites, but now we're challenging that. For centuries, investigators have been exploring the sacred landscape of Avebury, romancing the stones, painting this picture of a landscape that was almost devoid of life, but visited when people came to worship or to bury their dead there. But archaeologists are now interested in looking at that landscape not only as a sacred space, but as a lived-in place. If they can prove that Avebury wasn't just a dead ritual landscape, but the prehistoric people actually lived in and around the stones, they will transform our picture of Stone Age Britain. So, teams from Leicester and Southampton universities have joined forces with the National Trust and are focusing on 2 spots: exploring in the fields that surround the stones and within the very centre of the circle itself. Avebury Stone Circle is too precious to dig, so they're using modern surveying equipment to investigate without causing any damage. But in the field overlooking the monument, the team have been granted privileged permission to excavate.
Okay, well, here we are, day 1. We're in the process of beginning the excavation. It's a site that was first discovered in the 1920s, and at the time it produced a very rich collection of both early and middle Neolithic flint work.
These ancient flints were an intriguing clue that prehistoric people were actively present in the fields surrounding the stones. But are these tools that have simply been dropped by people passing through, or were those people more permanently settled here? To find out, the team is examining every inch of ground for evidence of Stone Age flintworking.
One of the issues is the fact that it's not always easy, especially when you're digging, to recognise what's worked and what's not worked. So the basic policy is for people to keep everything that they think might be worked, and then afterwards we can just sort of go through the trays and root out anything that isn't.
And with expert eagle eyes, the careful scrutiny soon begins to pay off.
We found a lovely piece of Middle Neolithic Peterborough ware. It's from the body of the pot, and it's got markings on it where people have used their fingernails to indent a pattern. It's very exciting. It's good.
Over 5,000 years old, this pottery confirms that Stone Age people were active in these fields during the lifetime of the monument. And within the circle itself, the team's survey has produced even more extraordinary results. It's revealed a series of giant stones that once made up a square in the middle of the circle, and at its centre, what appears to be the remains of a house. This incredible revelation suggests that people might have been living inside the circle, but were they also living in the surrounding fields?
You found a nice scraper there, haven't you?
Yeah, and you can see this one's been retouched all the way around its circumference. So it's the first one we found on the site.
Yes.
The scraper on its own isn't evidence of occupation, but each tool that's discovered adds to the picture that's emerging of a busy Stone Age landscape.
It is one of the ugliest barbed and tanged heads I've ever found.
Sort of apprentice level.
Yes.
I mean, that could be made by a kid, couldn't it?
It could.
It suggests that whoever made this was basically still learning how to knap flint properly. And it's quite nice to find that kind of evidence of different sort of skill sets. Just makes it a bit more human.
These tools give insights into day-to-day prehistoric life, but the team then makes an even bigger breakthrough, finding evidence that this was much more than just a Stone Age workshop.
In front of me we have a small pit. Within it so far we've found pieces of cattle bone, charcoal and hazelnut shells. Sorts of things you can imagine people sort of cracking open and eating the nuts and then tossing the shells onto the fire.
The team has uncovered several of these pits across the site, and for Josh the evidence is mounting up that our ancestors weren't just working, but living here. And the final pit turns up one of the most exciting clues yet.
Is it a quernstone? And the answer is yes.
In the Neolithic, our ancestors made the transition from being hunter-gatherers to settled farmers, and they used quernstones to grind cereals. For the archaeologists, it's further evidence that people were living and working in the shadow of Avebury. This dig has produced some incredible finds, but how does it transform our picture of this iconic monument and the surrounding prehistoric landscape? I've invited site directors Mark Gillings and Josh Pollard into the lab to find out. And first, I want to know more about that astonishing house. The really exciting thing was the discovery in the middle of the circle here.
Yeah.
This is extraordinary.
The house is that little beastie behind the obelisk.
Oh,
just
right.
there. So we've got the obelisk, 7 metre long, so it would have stood to about 6 metres high. So they're putting this whopping great stone there. Then we have a square of substantial standing stones, 30 metre in diameter, centred on the house. So they're basically echoing the house, but on a colossal scale, huge, monumental scale.
So this is not a reef structure?
No. This is a square circle, if that makes any sense
Mark.
whatsoever. Suggestions on a postcard.
or a squircle as well.
Squircle. Apparently you can get cream from Boots for that. So you've got a square around the site of a former house, but elaborating it, enhancing it, monumentalising it, if you like. Then we've got a huge stone circle surrounding the square and the house. The geometric centre of that circle is slap bang in the middle of the house.
So does this building in the centre, does that predate the actual stone circle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Gives us an insight into the origins of the henge itself, I think.
The discovery of this early house is an important revelation, but incredibly the dig has revealed that the surrounding area was also densely populated.
There are a good number of tools that we came across, including these nice early Bronze Age barbed and tanged arrowheads.
Oh, lovely.
Which is an amazing piece of flint work.
So when does that date to then?
Somewhere between about 2400 to 1800 BC.
Yeah. I mean, I must say, looking at the film of you on site, and you know, Josh, when you're standing there with that tray and sorting through those flints, flinging one out, but you know, what painstaking work.
It's not easy to throw them quite so boldly. It comes with years of practice.
Yeah. We were quite surprised actually by the results, because we knew that there was a flint scatter there from the 1920s work. We'd done a little bit of field walking, but what we found was that the scatter was continuing. It's a much bigger scale than we imagined. It's a place that's repeatedly visited, probably from the late Mesolithic right through into the early Bronze Age. There's clear evidence of people actually living there for periods of time as well.
It's a much busier, kind of dynamic and alive landscape.
These could have been places which were just as significant, just as sort of laden with history and associations as many of the big monuments.
The Avebury project is helping to transform the story of one of our most famous prehistoric monuments, and perhaps it should make us think differently about Stonehenge as well. Archaeologists are now revealing that Britain's ancient monuments weren't empty and hushed sanctuaries, but bustling places full of people. Our next dig takes us to Repton in Derbyshire. Today, Repton is a small, sleepy village, but 1,200 years ago, it was the capital of Mercia, a powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdom. Legendarily, Repton played a key role in one of the most tumultuous events in our island's history, the Viking invasion. In the 8th and 9th centuries, the Vikings gained a fearsome reputation as warriors that made annual visits to British shores to rape, pillage and plunder before returning home. But in 873, so the legend goes, they upped their game, and this time they intended to stay. They beat the opposition at Repton and camped there for the winter, intent on continuing their attempted conquest the following year. The Anglo-Saxons chronicled the event, but much of the information we have about these Vikings was written centuries later in Icelandic sagas. Less historical accounts, more like swashbuckling tales. But now, a team of archaeologists from Bristol University has invaded Repton themselves. In just 3 weeks, they're hoping to test the idea that Repton really was the location of the legendary Viking winter camp, and begin to discover how the bloodthirsty Viking army prepared to conquer Britain.
We started this excavation last summer. We had a 2-week season and we were just getting down to evidence of Viking activity in terms of the artefacts.
To explore the possibility that this really was the legendary Viking camp, this year the team is using geophysical surveying kit to narrow down the digging targets.
There you go. So it goes up to 3,000.
Oh my God, minus.
So if you come back a bit further.
There's obviously a lot buried beneath the ground here, but only digging it will tell whether it's hidden Viking evidence. The team has divided their most promising trench into sections, and it soon reveals the first clue that someone here could have been setting out a camp.
This is the surface here, and you can see it's a just completely compacted, pebbly surface in a kind of loamy deposit. And you can see just thousands, millions of pebbles all compacted together. When it gets wet, this place becomes a quagmire. And what you really want to do, keep your feet dry.
Precisely, and if you perhaps have tents and things like that, having those surfaces is really helpful.
The team needs to work out whether this pebbled surface was indeed part of the Vikings' winter camp, and that depends on finding characteristic datable artefacts. For Mark, this is a particularly exciting dig because in the 1980s he excavated nearby and found a mausoleum with an almost identical pebbled surface. And on this, one of the most intriguing archaeological finds ever made in Britain.
Essentially, we found a gravel mound, and around the outside of that gravel mound were curbstones. And then when we removed the mound, we had essentially a mausoleum, and at the eastern end there were just bones and bones. There was about this thick of solid bones.
But dating this mausoleum has proved tricky. Viking coins were found amongst the bones, but when the remains were radiocarbon dated, they appeared to be hundreds of years too early to be Viking. But radiocarbon dating is now much more accurate. So as well as digging the new site at Repton, Kat is also resampling these bones to see if they really could be Viking after all.
There are about 70 or so skulls in total. We know that there were more than 70 people there. Minimum number of individuals is 249, and the way that was worked out was by counting the number of left femurs, so left thigh bones, because we only had one of those. We know that quite a few of them have injuries that they could have received in battle, so that could definitely be consistent with the Viking army.
But what Kat really needs is an accurate date on these bones, and she's hoping that new methods in radiocarbon dating will settle the question once and for all. Do these human remains date from the time of the Vikings? While the team waits for the results, back at the dig site, Mark has been busy mapping the pebbled surface, and this has revealed a tantalising link between the mausoleum and the potential Viking camp.
So this is our pebble spread, and then this is actually the remains of that pebble path coming down. So they built a path to keep their feet dry to go into the end of the mausoleum.
As the archaeologists reach deeper levels, they're starting to find clear evidence that this camp was set up by the Vikings.
There you go, Kat. Got a nice, really large but very delicate piece of bone.
Excellent. Could be something like pig.
Oh, well, it looks like a blade. It's very unusual to be sticking right up like that.
Is it iron?
It's definitely iron, yes.
Okay.
These discoveries are proving that the Vikings were camping down here, and they're beginning to build up a picture that the army wasn't just waiting out the winter, but preparing for total war against our Anglo-Saxon ancestors.
I'm just looking through some of the pieces of slag that we've got. So this is metalworking waste. So these camps aren't just a place where you wait for the next battle to take place. You're actually doing a lot of active work and repairing, making new objects, and so on.
After 3 weeks of digging, the team has for the first time found hard evidence that Repton was the site of the legendary Viking camp. And as a bone expert myself, I want to find out if those skulls belong to the Vikings themselves. So I've invited Kat into the lab to reveal all. OK, Kat, what are the dates on these skulls?
Okay, so they are all completely consistent with a date in the late 9th century.
They are?
They are, yeah, all of them. And so they all fit with an 873 AD Great Army winter camp.
But do we know if these people are Vikings? I mean, just because they're 9th century, that doesn't mean they're Vikings.
Exactly, so we need a little bit more evidence than that. They could still be the local population, perhaps people who were killed when the Viking army attacked Repton. And so I've been trying to find some more evidence from the bones to see where they grew up. And I've been doing that by looking at isotope evidence from their teeth. So whatever chemicals you've incorporated into your diet as a child will remain in your teeth for the rest of your life and for 1,000 years afterwards.
And
some of them are completely beyond what you would expect from England at all.
Right.
So one of these skulls here has a value very consistent with inland Scandinavia.
It sounds as though it is certainly possible that all of these individuals came over from Scandinavia.
Absolutely, and several of them we know couldn't have come from England at all.
And this skull is very definitely male, got really chunky mastoid processes and big ridges over the ear hole just there, but some of them are not male?
That's right, I don't know if you noticed, these two here are actually both women. So the question is, of course, were they part of the army?
Are they female warriors?
They could be.
It's actually impossible to know whether these really were female Viking warriors, But there were definitely women at Repton.
A lot of them do have injuries, so they were clearly in battle. We have evidence from elsewhere in the Viking world that women are buried with weapons in typical sort of warrior graves. It's certainly a possibility.
During the dig, the team didn't just find evidence about who was camped at Repton, but about how the army was preparing for invasion.
We found some things that were definitely associated with the Viking winter camp. Most obvious are probably these two nails here. So they are ship nails.
Oh, are they?
They're called clinker nails.
Yeah.
I'll show you one. So they're a very particular type. So this would have fastened together two bits of wood. You put the nail in one end, a rove at the other side, and then you hit it with a hammer, and it goes clink. And that's why it's called a clinker nail.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And this is very typical for ship constructions. And because we've got these nails here, this showing quite possibly that they are fixing their boats. And because we're finding so much metalworking evidence, that's really backing that up as well. That's part of an axe. It's identical to illustrations of types found in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting. So finding these weapons, again, it's very consistent with that Viking army.
But not every object was to do with warfare.
Now these are little gaming pieces.
Are they?
Yes. We can see some of them have a little hole underneath.
Oh, yeah.
We think that's for putting them on a pegged gaming board.
I think small objects like this are just so intriguing, aren't they? Because we go from that kind of bigger picture of this Viking army coming in to the sort of the details of day-to-day life in the camp.
Kat and her team have proved that the legend of a Viking camp at Repton was true. And now, for the first time, we have some detailed insights into how the Vikings set about their fabled invasion. It's an invaluable addition to the growing archaeological record, helping us to unpick our island's very own Viking saga. And there are finds from Somerset which help to illuminate how this next chapter in English history played out. After they'd camped at Repton, the Vikings set their sights on conquering the rest of England. But when they headed southwest, they were to be stopped in their tracks by one of Britain's most celebrated kings, Alfred the Great. This is the most famous artefact, isn't it, associated with Alfred?
It is. We have to admit, sadly, that this is a replica. The real thing is in Oxford in the Ashmolean Museum.
But that means I can pick it up.
You can pick it up, yes. And the Alfred jewel was found in Somerset, in a Somerset field in 1693. Written around the frame are the words, "Alfred ordered me to be made."
What is the object?
The likelihood is that it's in fact the head of a pointer, that a thin rod would have been attached to it there, and that pointer would have been used for following words in a book. In a way, it's in this very small gleam of gold, it is gathered up everything that Alfred represented. He aimed to be three things: a soldier, to keep his kingdom safe, a scholar, and also a Christian king, so that the help of God would protect him and his people from the threat that the Vikings posed.
Alfred dedicated his life to resisting the Vikings, and without him, British history would have played out very differently. And of course, eventually he was victorious against the Vikings. He beat them at Edington.
He did, yes. The great year in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is the year 878, around Easter time, when, having hidden away in the fen fastnesses of Athelney,
burning the cakes,
he then went to Egbert's Stone on the eastern borders of the county and gathered the people of Somerset, Wiltshire and part of Hampshire to him, and then went on to defeat Guthrum, the king of the Danes, at the Battle of Edington.
And there's his name on the side there,
It is
Alfred.
Alfred, yes. It's extraordinary.
Alfred's victory was a landmark moment in British history. By defeating the Vikings, he bound the Anglo-Saxons together and laid the foundations for a unified England. Our next dig takes us forward 1,000 years in British history to Burrow Island in Portsmouth Harbour, and from famous kings and Vikings to humble, unmarked graves. Burrow Island is a tiny tidal isle overlooked by the famous historic naval dockyard. Portsmouth was a thriving maritime hub during Britain's age of empire, But this particular island has a much darker story to tell. Burrow Island was nicknamed Rat Island in the 19th century, where, as local legend has it, the rodents fed on the dead bodies of people buried there. Recently, that legend has been proved true, as the forces of nature has revealed the bodies buried here.
We came here in 2014 following one of the big storms when the police said there were human remains on the foreshore. Indeed, there was a human skull. And we recovered 5 individuals from graves cut into the rock surface of the cliff on the island.
Now, in the summer of 2017, Richard and his team have returned as 3 more graves have been exposed by the tides. They believe that Rat Island's bodies belong to criminals incarcerated on prison hulks moored in Portsmouth Harbour during the 19th century. These floating jail ships housed children as young as 8, and many on board would have committed only minor crimes. The people incarcerated in these floating prisons would have lived in appalling conditions, and they've been practically written out of history. While we will never discover their individual identities, this dig hopes to bring their stories back to life and to tell us what the Britain of Empire was really like for those who fell foul of the law. The team has just 4 days to investigate. Each day that the bones lie exposed to the elements increases the risk of them being washed away forever, and they have to work extra fast with only a short window between tides to lift the skeletons. But only hours into day 1, and they've made incredible progress.
We're starting to get some of the skeletal remains. So we've just been working on this arm, which is starting to come out here. Got a hand. Do you want to show a little bit?
So we've got some feet bones coming through here. Remains the coffin side there, possibly the lid. The top of the coffin's come down there.
As soon as they start lifting the skeletons, the bones immediately provide a shocking insight into the terrible diets and poor health of those who perished on board the prison hulks.
So, so a lot of dental decay on this one. You've got a few abscesses or cavities just there, another abscess there, another one there.
And the skeletons aren't the only evidence suggesting that disease was rife on board these ships.
Really intriguing thing is this black layer. There's just a black line within the material, and it looks like pitch or burning or tar, something like that. There are some documentary references to material from the prison hulks being burnt on the island, especially if, rather unpleasantly, there were infestations of cholera.
We know from documentary evidence that those on board the prison hulks were beset with diseases such as typhoid, cholera and smallpox. By the middle of day 2, even more burials are coming to light.
Ryan, did you say there's something unusual about the one you're working on?
We've just exposed some more bones that suggest perhaps it's a double burial, perhaps 2 stacked on top of each other.
And what makes you think that then? Where are the extras?
So what we've done is we've come down onto this other set of radius and ulna here, which in effect gives us 3 of each. And so unless we're looking at
okay, so you got an extra arm.
Extra arm, yeah, in effect.
With bodies stacked up and piled high, the archaeologists are now certain that Rat Island was an extensive cemetery. And as the dig nears its end, a 4th skeleton gives the most startling insight into the fate of one who perished on board the prison ships.
Got a craniotomy here, so you can see
What's a craniotomy?
You can see this cut through the skull. It's to access the brains. They do this in autopsies. So in post-mortem examinations today, with the deceased, they will cut open the head to access the brain.
The skull has clearly been sawn open. This craniotomy could have been carried out as part of a post-mortem on this body. After just 4 days of rescue archaeology, the team has recovered 4 skeletons of people who may have spent their last months or years in terrible conditions on board the prison ships, ending up in unmarked graves on the island. To find out what the team has learnt from these burials, I've invited Richard and Nick into the lab.
Sometimes I think when we look at human remains archaeologically, we can think that it's gruesome, but actually we're just looking at normal life and death. But in this case, this is a terribly gruesome story, isn't it?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. So we're actually dignifying the remains, avoiding their destruction, and they've actually become our teachers now, teaching us about the past.
So this is one of those skeletons from the film. Quite clearly, this is the one that had the craniotomy. Can we have a closer look at that? If I bring that over. It's a fairly rough job, isn't it?
It is, yes, and there's a few attempts, I think, to open the skull.
So it's been cut round here. You can actually see the lines of sawing on it.
Exactly.
And then I presume what they've done is just stick something like a chisel in here and then pop it off, because actually on this side it's broken.
It's been snapped, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think this was done as a form of autopsy to determine the cause of death, or do you think it was probably more about using it as an example of anatomy, finding out more about anatomy?
The bodies on the prison hulks are bequeathed. They're like Oxford and Cambridge University, so they can be looked at by anatomists. But there are cases before that of people doing autopsies just to see what people are dying from, because there are large numbers of people dying.
But looking at this skeleton now, it's impossible for us to determine the cause of death. What we do know is that mortality rates were high on the prison ships.
It must have been an utterly horrendous existence for prisoners on board those hulks.
Well, when you think of the numbers involved, 300 is an average on one of these ships, but it goes up to best part of 1,000 people. Your bed spaces are sort of stacked in hammocks. Now, the allotted bed space to start with was 5'10" by 1.5 feet. So there are people living in absolute squalor and filth. If you tried to escape, you were put into the black hole at the bottom of the ship, so you were incarcerated with no light, rats running around. Disease was rife. The death rate was up to about 30% of people that went onto these hulks. Just mind-bending, it really is.
And do we know anything about where these people would have come from generally? Are they likely to be local criminals?
There's an article in the Oxford Times which refers to a Charles Morris Jones, who's from Aberystwyth, and he steals a certain amount of cloth from his employer, and as a result he's given 14 years and he dies on the prison hulks. And the newspaper goes on to report that the body of Charles Morris Jones was removed from the ship and buried on the convicts' burial ground of Rat Island.
It is sad, isn't it?
It's
horrendous to think of those prison hulks.
Very poignant thing, to see an individual like this who may have committed a very minor offence, and for him, just being on the ships was enough to basically sign him a death sentence.
Rat Island's graves give us a unique insight into the grim realities of crime and punishment in the early 19th century. It's a rare glimpse into a murky world that's often missing from the official record that our Victorian ancestors left behind. Our next investigation plunges us back more than 5,000 years to a time when Britain was on the cusp of enormous change. Our modern landscape is littered with iconic Stone Age structures we know as barrows. They've always been assumed to be ancient burial mounds. Barrows are amongst some of the most obvious traces of our prehistoric ancestors in the landscape, and we thought we knew exactly what they were about. They're burial mounds, surely. But 2 digs are now challenging that interpretation and also shedding light on this pivotal moment in prehistory when our ancestors make the transition from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers. The first dig in our prehistoric two-parter takes us to the mysteriously and rather gruesomely named Cat's Brain, a recently discovered barrow which sits in the heart of the world-famous Stonehenge ritual landscape. This summer, a team from Reading University set out to investigate it, the first time a long barrow has been dug near Stonehenge for over 50 years.
We're at the end of week 2 at Cat's Brain. We've exposed all of the archaeology and every element is there. This is just unbelievable.
Jim has good reason to be excited. Because centuries of ploughing had destroyed the mound itself, the team had feared there would be nothing left to find. But the preservation below ground level is much better than they'd expected. The foundations of the barrow are clearly visible, and they now feel they've every chance to find out how the people who used Stonehenge buried their dead.
This is the section of the ditch which at the moment is producing some really good quantities of early Neolithic pottery. It's the sort of soil that just makes you want to jump in and start digging. Extraordinary.
Spurred on by their finds, the team sets to work troweling the site, and their efforts soon pay off. As they reach the deeper levels, Neolithic finds are coming thick and fast.
This has really sort of caught my attention. I saw this when it came out of the ground. It's absolutely beautiful leaf-shaped arrowhead, classic early Neolithic flint work. Yeah, fresh as anything. I mean, it could have easily been made just yesterday, and exactly what we were hoping for.
Dating to around 3500 BC, the arrowhead is precisely the right date for a Neolithic burial mound. But as the dig progresses, the site becomes more and more baffling. There are no burials here, no skeletons, not a single bone. Instead, they discovered a load of post holes. And it's leading Jim to an extraordinary conclusion about this monument.
It's quite complex. I mean, we can see post holes showing up and beam slots. I mean, it's looking very much like an actual building rather than just a replica building for the long barrow.
Catsbrain is such an odd site. It's not at all what we expect from a Neolithic long barrow. Well, 120 miles away, there are more long barrows that are being investigated, and once again, these are looking unusual. So the best thing to do, we thought, was to look at those two sites together, to compare and contrast and see what they teach us. This second dig takes us to Dalston Hill, near Peterchurch in Herefordshire, where a team from Manchester University has been investigating 3 ancient burial mounds.
So we're now 2 weeks into the excavation, and most of what we've been doing to this point is cleaning down onto the surface of the Neolithic mound.
Like Catsbrain, the mound itself was destroyed long ago, but the underground preservation is excellent. And yet again, as the team go in search of burials, they make a totally unexpected discovery.
It looks like the base of a circular post hole.
Just like at Catsbrain, this team expected to find a burial mound, but once again, it's looking like a building. And here the preservation of the wood is so incredible that Julian can even glimpse how this building was put together.
Here, uniquely, we've got part of the timber superstructure of the building. So within this great mass of burnt daub and clay, we've got timbers like these, where you can see the grain of the oak, and in places you can even see the carpentry. So this one here, you can see it's a forking piece of timber with a peg that's gone straight through down into it. It's telling us that the carpentry that's been involved in putting this building together is really very sophisticated. You're seeing mortises, you're seeing pegs, all of which means that you're dealing with really quite sophisticated timber architecture.
As Julian examines the evidence, he discovers something strange. Before it was covered with the mound, this building was burnt to the ground.
We know that certainly it burned. Our geophysicists tell us that it burned at a temperature in excess of 600 degrees centigrade, so very, very hot indeed.
Julian is starting to conclude that this monument started life as a large timber building, and when it fell out of use, it was burned to the ground and commemorated with a large mound. In fact, the digs at Dalston and Catsbrain suggest that for decades we've misunderstood some of our most famous Stone Age monuments. Far from being places of the dead, they were in fact buildings for the living. To find out more, I've invited Jim and Julian into the lab.
I honestly don't really know what to say. 2 absolutely amazing sites. They are incredible. Well, let's start with Catsbrain first. Did you have any idea that you were going to find this level of preservation when you took that top layer of soil away,
Absolutely
Jim?
none at all. And to find anything was absolutely extraordinary, and it was, you know, it was one of those moments where you know, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you sort of start shaking it. It's there. It's actually there. You know, right slap bang in the middle of our trench. I have no doubt in my mind that this is a building, large, early Neolithic timber hall.
That is fantastic. And these bits of stone, where are they from?
Well, those two chalk blocks came from one of the post holes. Interestingly, one of the very deep post holes.
These are utterly extraordinary. There are grooves here, and these grooves end in little pits.
That's right.
It's very, very deliberate and carefully constructed. And this looks like a rune. I mean, it looks like writing.
Yes,
it's amazing.
Yes, and the surface of them has been smoothed, and then they've deliberately incised it with markings, which clearly had some sort of symbolic importance to the community. And then that was deposited within one of these post holes. And of course, the whole of that building then is imbued with that symbolism.
Okay, well, that's utterly mind-blowing. And Dawston Walls looks exceptional as well, Julian.
So again, we have this idea that long mounds are cemeteries, that they're where people bury their dead. Each one of ours is constructed over the remains of a building, so that it's not that you're dealing necessarily with just the tomb of a group of people, it's the tomb of the house. So that you've got a transformation of something that is a building for the living to a house of the dead.
This is a time when people are becoming much more settled in the landscape, isn't it?
I think what's important is that they're forming more coherent communities. And one of the ways in which they draw these communities together is through a collective act of building something which serves as a symbol of the community. And that's what these huge halls are.
So throw in a Game of Thrones reference, you know, House Tyrone or House Lannister, for example, or the House of York. You know, the house symbolises something more. It's more than just the household. It's a wider community. These are the pioneers. These are our country's first agriculture. It's the first time we get domestic species. Out of this landscape, they're hewing out their own society, and all of that is represented within the building.
So you think there's something really important going on here, which is marking this transition, marking this change in lifestyle?
Yes, it's this moment of change, I think, that people remember for many, many generations afterwards. So first of all, you build the halls, then you burn those halls down, you transform them into long mounds, then those long mounds attract further activity. People come and dig pits into the mounds and place objects like these very nice axes into those.
Lovely.
Then there are more cremation burials in pits in the long mounds, and everything that happens on this hilltop is venerating, remembering, thinking back to that moment of inception.
Two extraordinary sites. Thank you so much. They're amazing.
Thank you.
The revelations from Catsbrain and Dawston are stunning. They not only challenge our previous interpretations of long barrows, they reveal how Britain's earliest farmers were beginning to forge a communal identity. Our next dig takes us to Leekfrith, in the heart of rural Staffordshire, and the discovery of an incredible 2,500-year-old trove of buried treasure. On a winter's day at the end of last year, local metal detectorists Mark Hambleton and Joe Canier were in this field when they made a remarkable discovery.
I looked at it, I knew it was gold straight away. Went down to Mark, and I says, Mark, what's this? And he said, God, it's a torc. We was shocked, yeah. Yeah, it was a find of a lifetime, isn't it? You know, yeah, brilliant.
But then they found 3 more. And knowing that these torcs were something rare and special, they reported them immediately to local finds liaison officer Teresa Gilmore. She was equally stunned.
Just after lunch, when Mark, one of the finders, turned up, sat down in front of me, reached into his bag and said, I've got something you need to see, pulled out an old duster, opened it up, and there were 4 gold torcs put in front of me, which put me into a state of shock. Absolutely amazing. Fantastic find.
Those gold torcs are stunning. They're beautiful works of art in their own right. But the archaeologists have key questions about them. Where do they come from? When were they made? And how did they end up in that field? Initial examination revealed that they were Iron Age in date. But to hear what else has been discovered, I've invited Finds Liaison Officer Teresa Gilmore into the lab. What wonderful, wonderful objects just to appear out of this field. Is there any context around them? Do we know of any Iron Age activity in the area?
No, we don't know of any actual settlement in that area.
Yeah.
So it's come out the blue.
So it's a complete surprise. And they're found individually, or they were discovered individually. Do you think they were quite separate burials then?
They were discovered individually because they've been dislodged by the plough, but looking at the damage and the distortion on them, we actually believe that they were originally buried as part of a nested arrangement.
And no idea at all as to why they've been buried in a field?
It's a very damp area, so we think probably as an offering to the gods.
This is beautiful.
It is. It's the most decorative piece out of them. What's really notable is the decoration, which is an early style Celtic artwork. You can see what looks like a little leaf.
I can see that in that diamond there. There is what looks like a little leaf there. That is absolutely beautiful. So what is the date of these, do you know?
Its current dating is about 4th century BC.
So very early, actually?
Yes, the earliest Iron Age gold we found so far.
Anywhere in Britain?
In Britain, yeah.
That's fantastic.
The date of these talks reveals that Iron Age people were skilled metalworkers much earlier than we'd ever thought. But even more intriguingly, the initial examination of them has suggested that the design influence came from abroad.
And do you think that the fact that these designs bear some similarity with talks found on the continent, do you think that means that people in Britain are picking up those ideas, or do you think these talks of themselves come from the continent?
We've done analysis on all 4 of these, and the composition we've got is very similar to European gold alloys. It's reasonable to assume that, yes, they've come over from the continent.
It is intriguing, isn't it, to think that these objects may not have just simply been traded across from the continent, but actually they could have come across with people.
Yeah.
There could have been high-status women coming over, perhaps even as brides.
Possibly.
I think these are absolutely gorgeous objects. I'm blown away by them. They're beautiful. But I'm so frustrated by not knowing who they belong to or why they were put in the ground. I mean, this could have been somebody's treasure that they were burying quickly and then running away, or it could have been a votive offering. We really don't know, do we?
We don't know, but what we do know is that Staffordshire now has links to the continent. So we've got continental styles of torcs, and the metallic composition is that of continental goldwork.
And you just didn't expect to find that?
We didn't expect to find that in Staffordshire.
There are still many mysteries around this Iron Age buried treasure, but we now have a fantastic new insight into the sophistication of our ancestors at this time, and we know that international links penetrated deeper into Britain than we'd thought before. The Iron Age marks the final chapter in British prehistory, the time before written records began. But as our next dig shows, even when our ancestors began to document their lives 2,000 years ago, archaeology still holds the key to understanding their world.
In AD 43, the Romans arrived, but it wasn't enough for them to come, see and conquer. They wrote about it as well. And so they recorded their battles and their building projects for posterity. But it seems that when it came to the British countryside, they ran out of ink.
And so there's always been a question over how far Roman culture and influence spread into rural Britain. But our final dig in Hampshire's Meonstoke Valley is shedding new light on this mystery. In the 1980s, archaeologists digging here discovered a Roman building of such importance that it's now housed in the British Museum. With little to go on except its quality and its rural location, it was labelled a villa. But a new investigation of the site is leading archaeologists to a radical rethink.
We have
An interesting discovery in the middle of the geophysics plot, we have this hexagonal building. Now this hexagonal building has put a whole new idea to us that in fact this might not be a villa, it might be a religious site. We think that this might be an interesting Roman temple.
As the team clears away the topsoil, the foundations of the hexagon become astonishingly clear to the eye. If this turns out to be a temple, it would be hugely significant. In an isolated location like this, it would suggest that Roman culture was far more ingrained in the countryside than we'd ever imagined before. So the team hunts for evidence that the Romans were worshipping here.
It's a meadow, let it be quite deep. There it is. Oh! Is it a minin?
Oh.
Looks like it might be a minin.
What's a minim?
A tiny, tiny coin.
This is a, I would say, House of Constantine type of coin. Early 4th century, almost certainly.
Buried in situ, the coins prove that this is definitely a Roman building. And Tony believes that they're the first clues that this could have been a temple site.
It looks as though there's a reasonable number of coins which could be votive offerings on the site.
Other Roman temples have often thrown up thousands of coins given as votive offerings to the gods. And another find seems to back up the idea that this was a sacred site.
There was a vertebrae from a cow, and we've had some very young sheep bone as well. And what looks like deliberately placed very small round pebbles. So it looks like we're getting a round pit here that was probably used for some ritual purpose, and it looks like it predates the rest of the sites that we've got here.
The find suggests that this could have been a religious site even before the Romans arrived, because in the preceding Iron Age, people may have buried rounded pebbles and animal bones as ritual deposits. And as the team begin to extend their trenches, they find a fascinating clue suggesting that this became an extensive temple complex under the Romans. They think they've found a bathhouse.
I've just found our first piece of painted wall plaster. It has a trace of opus signinum, which is the waterproof mortar that the Romans used in bathhouses. So this is very exciting.
The discovery of a bathhouse next to the temple makes the villa interpretation look increasingly shaky. Tony now believes it's much more likely that this was a sprawling complex of religious buildings.
And this, as a temple site, could have acted as a regional religious centre with people coming here for processions and festivals.
In the final weeks, the discovery of what could be more votive offerings supports Tony's theory, but it's on the penultimate day that they make their most incredible and intriguing find.
This very small fragment, but very interesting fragment, is part of a pipe clay or terracotta figurine. It is a type of figurine called a dea nutrix, or a mother goddess. What we've got is just a small part of it, which is the back of her head.
The goddess figure is the icing on the cake for a fantastic dig that seems to have revealed a complex of sacred buildings. But is there enough evidence here to prove that Roman religion was taking root in the heart of rural Britain? Tony's joining me in the lab to discuss his finds.
Well, Tony, this is utterly extraordinary. What we thought was a villa looks like something much more special.
Yes, it's a very interesting site. Effectively, 3 buildings. We have a large so-called aisle building, we have the bathhouse, and we have the hexagonal, what we're pretty sure is a shrine.
Yeah.
There are only 4 hexagonal buildings in the whole of Roman Britain.
It is really unusual, isn't it? And very, very obvious and very striking. Where's this beautiful painted plaster from, then?
The plaster all comes from a bathhouse.
Yeah, and you're sure it's a bathhouse, are you?
Yes, we're in the changing room, and the wall plaster all comes from the changing room.
Right.
And it's got what we think is a naked female figure, which
that,
we have
then.
to, yes.
Yes.
Yes, which is fairly obvious when you...
I think you might be right. That is a pair of breasts, I believe.
It certainly is.
And it's quite usual, isn't it, to find bathhouses associated with temples?
Yes, temple sites sometimes have quite a lot of other buildings next to them, which could be a hostel for pilgrims or visitors or whatever.
So do you think that's what we originally thought was a villa? Do you think that's what it actually is then?
We originally found the building in the 1980s and thought, right, we have a villa. It had a lot of elaboration to the architecture. Now maybe we can account for that now by saying it's a building that's associated with a temple site.
So Tony, say I lived somewhere nearby and I wanted to come and visit the shrine and perhaps worship the goddess here. What would I do when I arrive at this place?
That's a very interesting question. We get the notion that the building itself is the house for the god or the goddess and would have some sort of image like a statue or something like that in it. But it's not a place for congregational worship. You don't get everybody cramming inside and trying to worship. So most of the activity probably went on outside, and that's why we find things like the pit with the pottery and the bones and so on in it.
And are these the balls that came out of that odd pit?
These actually come from within the hexagon itself.
Right.
They're flints. They are probably fossil sponges or something like that.
So this idea that people are bringing small offerings, small coins, I mean, it's a low denomination, isn't it? And then also interesting shaped rocks.
Yes. This is rather more special. This is the head.
That's lovely. Isn't that lovely? Yeah.
Yes. And that's the back of the head and the headdress off the Dea Nutrix figurine. So
these figurines are well known, are they?
Yes, they're made in central France and they're imported. People probably bought in Britain and then dedicated at temple sites, perhaps deliberately breaking them. Nearly all of them are broken, often with the heads broken off.
Yeah. And Dea Nutrix, that's the nourishing mother goddess, and she's often shown with babies at the breast.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. But do you think this gives us an idea that actually Roman culture and Roman ideas about religion are permeating further into the British countryside than perhaps we'd imagined?
Hexagons are not a thing you find in the Iron Age in Britain. So this is a new idea. The deities, the god or goddesses that are being worshipped on the site probably go right back to the Iron Age. And I think the people who come to this site are probably local people.
I rather like that about the Romans, that they don't clear the original gods and goddesses out of the landscape. They work with them, don't they? They go along with them.
Yes, they integrated with the locals, but it is a form of imperialism, isn't it? We're taking over the local gods and calling them our own.
It's a wonderful site. It's a wonderful little temple site in a very unusual hexagonal building.
Yeah.
The dig at Meonstoke demonstrates that even a time period as well documented as Roman Britain can still be rewritten by new archaeological discoveries. And this programme has shown how every dig has the power to illuminate and alter the story of Britain, from discovering how the fearsome Vikings prepared for their invasion, to revealing the living and lived-in landscapes around some of our most famous ancient monuments, and showing the brutal reality of life and death for criminals in the golden age of empire. Our ancestors made the country we live in today, and through archaeology, we've been able to reach back through the centuries and touch their lives. We may be a small island, but we have a rich and complex history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for lost pieces from our missing past.
A tiny, tiny coin.
Every element is there. This is just unbelievable.
In 2017, their investigations continue to fill in the gaps.
Wow!
Bringing us closer to our ancestors than ever before.
What do you think of that, Roy?
In this programme, Digging for Britain showcases the best digs from the east of the UK.
Oh, wow. That's rather lovely, Sean.
Each of the excavations has been filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves.
Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for each exciting moment of discovery.
Ah, it's Excalibur.
How does that feel, Rupert?
Yeah, pretty good.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can take a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this programme, I'm joining archaeologists in the East to share in their biggest discoveries. We're diving deep in the English Channel, rescuing the precious cargo of a lost East India ship.
We find loads of coins.
And we travel to Suffolk to unearth traces of Britain's earliest occupants.
We found this incredible hand axe. Fantastic find.
It's also a big year in the East for Roman archaeology, and this episode includes hunting down evidence of Britain's first clash with the might of Rome.
This could be a very important clue to confirming that this is a base of Julius Caesar.
And to find out how these discoveries fit into the story of Britain,
I've come to Colchester to explore the Castle Museum and find out how the objects inside help to tell the story of the East.
But our first dig takes us out of Colchester and into the buzzing financial centre of London, and one of the biggest excavations in our capital's history. During the Blitz, the German Luftwaffe destroyed a third of the City of London. But amongst the devastation, glimpses of its ancient Roman past began to emerge from the rubble, including a remarkable Roman temple of Mithras, found just off Cannon Street. For archaeologists of the time, this was amongst the first evidence that parts of Roman London were still well preserved under the modern city, waiting to be rediscovered. In the post-war years, the site of the temple was built over, but it's long been believed that there was much more to be found in the layers beneath the Mithraeum. In 2012, archaeologists finally got the chance to revisit the site when the global information company Bloomberg started to redevelop the area. Now, in the year that the new building has been opened, the team are sharing their dig diary with us. This was an incredible opportunity for archaeologists to delve down into the deepest layers of London's history, right back to its origin. The excavation gave them the chance to find out more about the original appearance of the town, about who lived there, and about the lives of those first Londoners. The Bloomberg site was once at the heart of Roman London, straddling the Walbrook, a lost tributary of the River Thames. Because the site remains waterlogged, many organic remains have survived. This exceptional preservation gave archaeologists the unique opportunity to explore the realities of life in the very first London. Sadie Watson is heading up the dig.
To be honest, we've been itching to get our hands back on this site since 1954, really, when Grimes found the Temple of Mithras. We knew that there was a breadth of archaeology here that was unsurpassed in the general area. If you went 50 metres either side of this exact spot, you wouldn't get the same depth of material.
The Romans built London from scratch in the mid-1st century AD. But until now, the original appearance of the town has been a bit of a mystery. However, because the preservation is so good here, the team can effectively reconstruct the layout of an entire Roman neighbourhood.
What we've got here is a wattle structure, perhaps delineating some private land with some animals on the inside, or it could be part of a building. But it's absolutely amazing. I mean, obviously we're the first people to see this for nearly 2,000 years, so it feels a bit special. And it just makes you wonder, what's underneath this? What's the next thing we're going to find?
When the team began the dig, they were unsure of how much of the Roman town had been crushed by millennia of rebuilding over it. But what they're discovering is not just the traces of the original layout of this part of early London, but the very fabric of the streets. Many of the wooden buildings are preserved up to shoulder height, unheard of in Roman Britain.
So as well as the street, we have the houses alongside the street and the alleyways behind the houses. and the open areas where they were dumping their rubbish and things like that. So we have the whole streetscape laid out in front of us.
This incredible dig is revealing that beneath the modern streets of London lies a Roman timber town with wooden buildings lining the streets and a layout that wouldn't have been out of place in the Wild West. This astonishing discovery reminds us that London has always been evolving, adapting to the needs of its time, from its humble wooden beginnings into the modern city that we know today. Halfway through the dig, the team start to excavate down into the wooden buildings, hoping to discover new details about the lives of the first Londoners. And they're not disappointed.
So this is a penannular brooch made of copper alloy, and the pin is gone, but it would have been pinned into your tunic. And a really heavy steel yard weight. And we've had lots of weights and measures from this site, so the assumption is that they're doing industrial weighing and measuring here.
As the dig continues, the team unearths a wealth of personal finds from 2,000 years ago. The finds look so fresh. The waterlogged conditions have seemingly frozen them in time. But it's one particular group of leather finds that allows the team the most intimate insight into London's fledgling population.
Got coming up for about 500 shoes. You can see very clearly that these are child-sized shoes, and at the other end of the spectrum you've got large men's boots. So we have evidence for families living here. It's not just all about economic life, it's quite a tangible connection to the individual people who lived here.
These items belong to the earliest occupants of our capital city. They allow us to populate the ancient Roman streets with men, women, soldiers, traders and children, the first people to call London home. This excavation is producing more Roman discoveries than any other site in London. But then, towards the end of the dig, the team finds something truly remarkable. Small, rectangular pieces of wood. More valuable to the archaeologists than silver or gold, these are ancient writing tablets.
There are two pieces of writing tablet here. So you've got the little indentation for the wax to go there. They're essentially just letters. Really nice, gets you close to the people.
Incredibly, this writing tablet was not alone. In the end, the team would find more than 400 of them, the largest collection of their kind ever found. But the big question was, would they discover any writing on them? These would have been wax tablets. The wax itself is long gone. But are there any traces of the writing on the wood itself? The team is in luck. They can see the impressions of letters. But in order to read them, they need to bring in a specialist. Professor Roger Tomlin is one of the world leaders in translating Latin shorthand. Working from photographs and hand drawings, he has the daunting task of deciphering the writing. Now I'm inviting Roger and Sadie into the lab with these amazing tablets so that I can finally hear the voices of the first Londoners.
What an amazing sight, and how fantastic to have writing preserved. So, Roger, what do these letters actually say? What do they tell us?
Well, they tell us all sorts of tantalizing extracts of what Roman businessmen were writing to each other about. This is a particularly well-preserved tablet, and when I saw this in the conservation lab when it was still wet, I was very excited because I could read the first word at the top left-hand corner, which was Nerone, which was clearly a reference to Nero, the Emperor Nero, and then the date, the 8th of January 57, and then the beginning of the text is written by a man called Tibullus, and he acknowledges he owes the sum of 105 denarii in respect of goods sold and delivered.
So an incredibly early financial document.
Yes, it seems to be the earliest dated financial document, only about 10 years after the Romans got to London. And here they are setting up business enterprises, importing and exporting.
Not much has changed.
Well, no, not much has changed.
And what about the names? Do they give us an insight into who these people were, where they'd come from?
Well, ideally, they tell us who the person is, and this is a nice example here. It's an address of a letter which reads, Dabes, you will give this letter, understood, to Junius the Couparius, the cooper, the barrel maker, a brewery somewhere in the area, and presumably Junius is making barrels for it.
It's just astonishing. You know, this is the kind of detail that we expect from, you know, the Second World War. And to be able to reconstruct that level of detail going back 2,000 years ago, that's amazing. What about the other objects, Sadie? What about these beautiful brooches? Do they give us clues as well as to where people were coming from?
Certainly they do, and brooches tell you a lot because people tend to bring them with them from wherever they've come from to London. So we have lots and lots of examples from the Western Roman Empire, Gaul and the Rhineland particularly. But this superbly decorated, wonderful example is actually from what we now call Norfolk. So it's from the Iceni tribe.
Oh, Boudicca's tribe.
Boudicca's tribe, exactly.
Yeah.
And who would have moved in to London and worked and lived amongst the Londoners as well. So not only do we have people coming from outside Britain to come to London and found this town in open fields, we also have people coming from elsewhere across the country to live and work here as well.
It seems that just like today, the first London drew its inhabitants from across Britain and Europe.
So we are really looking at the very beginning of London. What would it have been like?
Well, we have evidence, of course, that there's commercial activity going on with the writing tablets from the very beginning. We also have a huge assemblage of militaria, so we know that the army were here in great number. There would have been industries such as metalworking, slightly more noxious ones, leatherworking, all the things that you would expect, really, but living cheek by jowl with everything else as well. We also have one of the tablets has an alphabet on it.
This one here?
Yeah, this one here. Possible evidence of education.
Yes.
Somebody learning or practising their alphabet.
A, B, C, D, and so on.
Oh, that's just extraordinary. That's wonderful. It's a Roman child learning to read and write.
So it's a real mix of activity.
So the very, very earliest beginnings of something, but a lot of things which remain very familiar to us today. Banking, beer, and this melting pot of cultures.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Bloomberg dig has revealed the forgotten voices of the people that first built London. And as the Moeller team finishes the analysis of the finds over the coming year, they'll be able to give us a uniquely detailed picture of an entire neighbourhood in a Roman British town. By the middle of the 2nd century AD, London had become one of the most important trading centres in Northern Europe, as well as the capital of Roman Britain. But it could have turned out very differently. London wasn't the first capital of Roman Britain, Colchester was. That is, up until the middle of the 1st century, when it met a grisly fate. And I'm told the best place to understand this story is underneath the castle. In AD 60, within 20 years of London being founded, the British warrior queen Boudicca revolted against Roman rule and eventually led an army of enraged natives right into Colchester. At the heart of the town was the Temple of Claudius, and it was situated right here. Amazingly, its foundations still survive, and curator Glyn Davis is taking me down into the basement to see them.
Very steep.
This is incredible, Glyn.
Yes, this is a very special space. We're actually standing in a full space. We're standing in a chamber that would have originally been filled with sand, and this construct made up a huge platform or podium upon which the Temple of Claudius, the largest of its kind in Roman Britain at the time, would have been built.
So what happened to the temple then? Because obviously Colchester was attacked during the Boudiccan rebellion.
It was. Now, you have to remember the Temple of Claudius was also where the imperial cult was worshipped. In a way, it was a symbol of Rome, and to the Roman Brits, a symbol of their oppression. And this would have been a target. And after burning a lot of the town, Boudica and the tribes who united with her would have beelined to this temple where the townsfolk had basically sought refuge. And we know from Tacitus, our ancient Roman writer, that they besieged the temple for 2 days.
It must have been absolutely terrifying for the people of Colchester who'd sealed themselves up in this temple when Boudica arrived with her army.
It must have been. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of men, women, children, hearing the shouting and the rampage outside. And of course, they start to set fire to the temple, so it starts to heat up. Maybe even elements of it start to fall after 2 days. And it's after those 2 days that Tacitus tells us that they eventually broke down those front doors. And then a bloodbath above our heads 2,000 years ago would have been absolute carnage.
And what about after the rebellion? Because that rebellion eventually failed.
It eventually failed with a huge loss of life on both sides. And Colchester was rebuilt. Indeed, the temple was rebuilt, but Colchester never retains that capital. That moves on to London, Londinium, and it never quite reaches the heights that Londinium does after that.
So it never quite recovers from that, the onslaught of Boudica.
That devastation, no.
Yeah.
They left a mark.
Archaeological discoveries from both London and Colchester have added flesh to the bare bones of history, revealing the lives of the people that lived through the bloody beginnings of Roman Britain. Our next story takes us into the English Channel, to one of the richest shipwrecks off our shores. The Goodwin Sands are notorious as swallowers of ships. Today, the remains of over 2,000 wrecks litter the area. One of them is the Rosevik, a Dutch East India Company ship that sank in 1740 on its way out to Indonesia. In the 17th and 18th century, Britain and the Netherlands were two of Europe's leading powers. Both were great seafaring nations, locked in a battle for control of the lucrative trade with Asia. For the winner, the prize was enormous wealth.
The race for the East was a dangerous business, and it wasn't just about the wealth of individuals and corporations, but of entire nations. As archaeologists get to work on the largest underwater excavation since the Mary Rose, they're hoping to gain insights into just how high the stakes and the risks really were.
The East India ships were stuffed with incredible riches to trade with the Far East. What makes the Rosevik so special is that it sank with all of its cargo, and nothing was ever salvaged. Now a team from Historic England and the Dutch government is investigating. They hope to understand more about these trade routes and the level of financial risk taken by the traders on each voyage. Underwater archaeologist Martin Manders is leading the team.
We're now on board of the Schelling, which is our research ship, and we're just right above the shipwreck. Within 3 months we have to excavate a very large ship. Well, luckily we only do the stern part of the ship. I think people will be amazed at what we bring up.
The team have decided to excavate the back half of the ship because it is the best preserved section. Part of the cargo hold was located here, so they're confident they'll be able to find evidence of what the Rosevik was taking to the East Indies. But excavating a shipwreck on the perilous Goodwin Sands is a complex operation. The unpredictable weather and strong currents mean that time and tides are always against them. In late August, after months of preparation, they finally begin the diving operation.
Just to confirm, the clump weight's a couple of metres off the seabed.
Slowly, the ghostly timbers of the Rosevik become visible amongst the gloom. The team gets to work using giant suction tubes known as airlifts to help them clear away centuries of sand from the wreck. Then their hard work pays off. They get their first glimpse of the Rosevik's lost cargo.
Over here we've got a few of the artifacts that we excavated so far. These very nice jugs. Actually we found quite a few down there close together, so this could be that it was cargo, meant for trading.
These tankards provide the first insights into the kinds of goods that were being traded in the Far East. But the team needs more evidence to find out about the true scale of wealth that was stowed on board. They need to explore further into the wreck. However, what they begin to retrieve is copper sheeting.
There wasn't much that the people needed in the Dutch Indies, but what they did need was building material. So a lot of raw material, copper, also a lot of just normal bricks. They were weight, so they were ballast, but in a way they were also goods to be sold.
These discoveries are important evidence of how the British and the Dutch built their settlements in the East. But they weren't just out to build colonies. The real reason for taking such risks, with an 8-month voyage across pirate and storm-ridden waters, was trade. The key mission of these ships was to take out wealth from the Netherlands and Britain and bring back riches from the Orient. Exotic goods like spices and textiles, items that were worth a fortune back in Europe. Historical records suggest that this ship should have been laden with silver currency, but the team hopes to discover the true scale of the investment involved in a single voyage. After weeks spent living on the research ship and diving day and night, they finally hit the jackpot.
We find loads of coins. We have silver from Mexico, but we also have silver from the Potosi mines in Bolivia.
A piece of 8, so it's worth 8 reals. Most of the ones that we've got so far have been from Mexico.
The Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC, traded using Spanish silver. As the archaeologists continue diving, they retrieve hundreds more coins. But towards the end of the project, they make an unusual discovery.
They're coming in clusters, yeah, they're coming in clusters.
Not all of the coins appear to be official Spanish currency.
We've only just started uncovering these ones. A lot of the money that's been recovered has been the Spanish money so far. I believe these are riders. These are Dutch coins.
This leads Martin to a surprising conclusion. He believes that the Dutch money belonged to the crew themselves.
But I think we're getting to the personal stuff because of the coins that are so different from the cargo coins of the VOC. So we're getting to personal belongings. Really interesting.
So why were the men on board the Rosevic transporting such large quantities of personal wealth to Indonesia? I've asked Martin to come into the lab with this extraordinary haul of silver coins.
I'm just amazed at what a huge amount of wealth went down with this ship. I mean, this is like a floating bank.
Yes, well, in a way it was. We know that it had 36,000 coins from Mexico, the pillar dollars, on board of the ship. The VOC would take a lot of coins with them from the same kind of date, very shortly before the VOC would go out. So we think that looking at the date, 1737, just before the ship went out, we think this is the money they took along with them.
So that's kind of official business, that's official VOC money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it is 8 reales, so a piece of 8, as they say. These coins we find here have a much older date. And these are ducatons from the southern Netherlands. And these are from 1619, so 120 years before the ship sank.
So where are these early coins from then?
Exactly. Well, they were smuggled. They were smuggled on board. And why would they smuggle money? And who would smuggle money? Well, it's actually everybody, from the captain until the most simple seaman. They would bring silver from the Netherlands to the Dutch Indies, because silver was worth more in the Indies than in the Netherlands.
It's just extraordinary. So there's the official business of the VOC, and then everyone on board, from the captain down to the humblest sailor, also stood to make a personal gain from this voyage.
Exactly.
But Martin also believes that smuggling played a significant part in the final demise of the East India Companies.
The funny thing about the smuggling money is that although it was illegal, people would even borrow from official banks money to bring to the East Indies as well. And when they lost the money, they had to go to court, or the widows had to go to court.
Yeah.
And there was so much corruption that in 1795, the VOC was so much up to its debt that it went bankrupt, and all the assets of the VOC came to the Dutch government.
So that was, what, 50 odd years after the shipwreck, the company went bust?
Exactly.
And I think what the shipwreck shows us is both, on the one hand, what there was to gain from this international trade, but also the immense risks that were taken.
Well, that's exactly the truth, yeah.
The East India Companies were the world's first multinational corporations. They accumulated vast fortunes, but were prone to corruption and mismanagement. It was the Dutch that folded first. The British soon followed, but not before they'd expanded their influence in Asia. When the government took over the business, the foundations had already been laid for Britain's empire in the East. Archaeology provides us with another way of looking at history, adding to and sometimes challenging the written records. But when it comes to prehistory, we rely solely on evidence unearthed from the ground. And that's exactly the case with our next dig as we head to Barnham in East Anglia, where archaeologists are searching for the answer to an old Stone Age mystery.
400,000 years ago, Britain was a very different place indeed. There was savannah here, where elephants, rhino and lions roamed alongside some of our early ancestors. And any evidence that we can get of these people and the way that they behaved is incredibly precious. That's exactly what our next excavation is revealing.
Around 400,000 years ago, there's evidence of an expanding human population right across Northern Europe, including Britain. But who were these people, and why were they here? Part of the answer may lie in a disused clay pit near the village of Barnham, an incredibly well-preserved Stone Age site, first discovered by the Victorians. Nick Ashton from the British Museum is one of the leaders of the team.
We're just here for 3 weeks, so day 2 we've got another 20 to go, so lots of work to be done.
The team starts the dig by trying to discover what the environment was like for some of Britain's earliest occupants, investigating an area that was once on the edge of an ancient lake. It's not long before the team's animal bone expert Simon Parfitt is called in to identify the first find.
It's a pond terrapin, so this is one of the really important elements in the animal assemblage that tells us about the climates. So today these animals are living in more continental Europe, in parts of France, where the summers are much warmer. So this provides a really good indication of what the climate was like.
400,000 years ago, Britain was a very different place. Much warmer than today, with animals that seem exotic to us now.
We found the edge of a piece of bone. If we take it out, we can see that it's a spongy bone in the middle and very thick cortical bone. It's actually the rib of an elephant. So this is obviously a tiny fragment of a very large rib.
And living right next to the elephants were humans.
In this area, we found artifacts through this part of the sequence. And these are hard hammer flakes, part of the Clactonian industry. So yeah, this is part of the contemporary vertebrate life that was living with humans at that time.
Clactonian is the name given to a particular stone toolkit, including simple flakes of flint used for butchery. These tools may look unremarkable, but to the archaeologist's eye, they have the telltale signs of being worked by a human hand. They're evidence that people were living and hunting here in early Britain.
Yeah, 2 bags, 2 numbers.
But then, towards the end of week 1, the team finds a more advanced Stone Age technology.
We're at the end of day 6, and fantastic find found in area 3, just as we were packing up. This incredible hand axe. And it's only the 3rd we found from the site in, I think, about 10 years of digging. As you can see, it's incredibly fresh condition. It's this black flint, very fresh edges. Or whether it's
This exquisite hand axe is much more advanced compared with the basic flint tools that the team has been finding so far. So the question is, did the people living here make a sudden technological leap forward, or is this hand axe evidence of a different group coming into the area? It's not clear yet, so the team continue their hunt for more clues. And in week 2, they find something surprising and exciting.
Is that some burnt flint glass?
Yes, there are multiple pieces here.
This evidence is found in the same band of soil as the more advanced tools, and from the burning pattern, Nick believes that this could be intentional use of fire by humans.
The interesting thing is the quantity of burnt flint that's coming up. So it's associated with the group of people who are making hand axes. A really interesting conclusion is the use of fire and the manufacture of hand axes. Are they two parts of their technological package that they bring into the area at this time? I must confess, I still keep an open mind, but I'm inclining more and more towards the conclusion that people are actually using fire in this area, and it's not just a natural fire.
This potential evidence for humans using fire could be amongst the earliest ever found in Britain. Combined with the more advanced stone tools, it suggests that a new group of people was arriving here. But who were they, and where did they come from? Nick has brought some of the artefacts into the lab to help us answer some of these questions.
Well, Nick, this is a really exciting site, and thank you for bringing in the finds. But you've got these 2 different types of stone technology on the same site.
Yeah, so over here on the right you have very simple flakes and cores. They'll do the job, but they're very simple. And here we have a clear change in the technology, and you have this beautiful hand axe.
That's beautiful. Very individual thing. So who do you think was making the Clactonian, and who do you think was making that?
If I was to hazard a guess, and it is only a guess, maybe you've got Homo heidelbergensis making these more primitive-looking tools, and perhaps the hand axe makers are very early Neanderthals.
So this could be evidence of the first Neanderthals in Britain?
Yeah, some of the first evidence.
Oh, that's really exciting.
Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals are thought to be the 2 main species of humans living in northern Europe around this time. An ancient land bridge with the continent would have allowed them easy access into what is now Britain.
Here's a tricky question. Why are they coming over? Is this just populations expanding and people are just milling about and starting to spill further northwest?
One of the ideas we're looking at is that there's, more or less around this time, there's a big deforestation event, not just in Britain, not just East Anglia, but right across Europe. And so the questions we're asking is, does it relate to some big natural disaster? Is it volcanic activity, for example, creating a big nuclear winter, or is it something even more exciting, like a big meteor strike? And that in itself would have a big impact on what humans were doing. If suddenly there's a loss of their sort of local habitat, loss of vegetation, that's going to affect the wildlife, and this will trigger population movement. So maybe this is linked to a different group of people coming in just over 400,000 years ago.
This new evidence from Barnum is helping us to understand more about the early inhabitants of Britain and the environment they lived in at an important moment in prehistory, when the very first Neanderthals arrived in Britain. But our next dig deals with newcomers of a very different kind. We're heading to the tip of Kent and possible evidence of the first Roman invasion of Britain. I came here back in 2010 for Digging for Britain to see the excavations in advance of the construction of the Kent Access Road. I witnessed the unearthing of Bronze Age burial mounds, Iron Age treasure,
Here we've got a tiny gold coin,
and multiple Roman graves. But this was just the tip of the archaeological iceberg, because after I left, the team made their most amazing discovery: the ditches of a vast fort that was potentially Roman. We know that this area of Kent was where the Romans invaded in AD 43, but incredibly the team dated this fort to almost a century earlier. At this time, only one Roman general was known to have visited our shores, the mighty Julius Caesar. So was this fort the first tangible evidence of his time in Britain? Now, no archaeological evidence of Caesar's actual arrival in Britain has ever been found, so the discovery of an early Roman fort is providing archaeologists with a precious opportunity to get closer to the truth. In the 50s BC, Julius Caesar is recorded as making 2 fleeting visits to our island. Dr. Andrew Fitzpatrick believes that this fort could have been built during one of those trips. Now he just needs to prove it. What he hopes to find is Roman military equipment that he can date to the time of Caesar.
We know that Caesar, in the second invasion, brought at least 25,000 soldiers and 800 ships. That must have left a lot of evidence.
If Andrew succeeds, he'll not only have found Julius Caesar's fort, but put us on the path to understanding why he made this early exploration of Britain. Andrew's first task is to get to grips with the full layout of the fort. His team uses geophysics to map the line of the ditches that once ringed the encampment. As the results come in, they reveal a tantalising clue.
Our geophysical survey showed that the fort runs in a rather unusual, irregular pattern here. So I think this is a specific style of defence to encircle large areas. And the reason it's a large area is because what this is defending isn't so much the soldiers as the fleet. And so the key to the story really is the sea.
Andrew believes that the fort's huge ditches formed a circuit of defences that protected nearby Pegwell Bay. This large open area is not only the perfect place to land a sizable navy, but also matches the description of Caesar's second visit to Britain in 54 BC. It looks like Andrew is on the right track, but he now needs to find dateable Roman artefacts left behind by Caesar's army. He believes the ditches are the best place to find them. As his team starts digging, they discover something intriguing.
Well, we believe it to be a Roman arrowhead.
And where was it found?
It was found about 30 centimetres off the bottom of that ditch there.
So it's from really near the bottom of the ditch.
Yeah.
So that could be a really important find for us in trying to establish if these ditches were dug by the armies of Julius Caesar.
Although rusty and broken, this piece of iron could represent a major breakthrough in Andrew's search for Caesar. Because to a specialist's eye, Roman weaponry is just as diagnostic as a World War I rifle for a modern historian. To make a positive identification, it still needs a good clean, so Andrew takes the find to conservator Graham Morgan for initial analysis. After a couple of hours of work, the weapon turns out not to be an arrowhead, but the tip of a spear.
Right, there we are. There's the object so far. It's very corroded. But that might be like the illustration you showed me before.
Like this one here.
You can see there's a centre rib on that as well, very similar.
I know that this weapon here was found in a Roman camp at the siege works of Alesia, and that's a site that Julius Caesar attacked in 52 BC. So the question is this from Ebbsfleet similar enough to the one from Alesia to suggest that we really do have firm evidence for Roman soldiers at Ebbsfleet in the 50s BC? And it looks quite close.
It does, yeah.
This possible Roman spearhead is an exciting clue, but to be sure that the fort belonged to Julius Caesar, Andrew needs more evidence. In September 2017, he returns to the site for the final time, hoping this time to unearth conclusive proof. The team begins by trying to find one of the entranceways to the fort, where they believe they're likely to find more artefacts. But their first discovery is totally unexpected.
So there are, is it two skulls there, or are there more?
There are more. There's these two, there's one over there, and there's one you may just about see being uncovered there.
Gosh, that's remarkable.
The team believes that these skulls may have once lined the approach to the fort as a chilling deterrent to the locals. If they're right, then perhaps they're close to one of the fort's entrances. They expand their trench and make a breakthrough.
And then we have a road here, which you can see in the cobbling, visible behind me, and it runs into the entrance of the defended enclosure.
Andrew believes the fort would have been similar to Caesar's other camps in France, with earthen banks, defensive ditches, and a rough cobbled road leading into the entrance. But more important is what the team find on the road. Strewn across the site is more human bone,
Benefit of some shade.
heavily corroded weapons, and one tiny find that could be the key in linking this fort to Julius Caesar.
Well, this small bit of iron could be the first hobnail that we found on this site. And you can see there's a shank here, and then it comes down to a slightly pointed domed head. Now, if that turns out to be a hobnail, the surface in which it's been found dates to the 1st century BC. And the only people who came to Britain wearing boots with hobnails in them were the soldiers of Julius Caesar's army. There can be no doubt about the significance of hobnails, and it would be in many ways the smallest of details that give us the clinching fact for the biggest of stories of the first chapter of Britain's history.
So could this humble piece of rusty iron solve one of the biggest questions in Roman archaeology in Britain? To hear the latest news from the site, I've asked Andrew to come into our lab with some of the most important finds. Oh, how exciting. Andrew, what is all the evidence that you're using to come to your conclusion that this probably is Caesar's fort?
We have a very large defended enclosure that dates to the 1st century BC. The shape of the defences is very similar to known Roman sites in France of 52 BC of Caesar. It's the right place, geography fits. We have weaponry that could well fit. And it's in terms of where would you land your army, I think it's here. It all points to that conclusion.
If that is a hobnail, is that going to clinch it?
It would be very strongly suggestive. And there are other pieces. We have possible Roman weapons.
These things here?
Yep. So the possibility is that this in your hand is the tip of the pilum, which is a Roman type of weapon.
And this is the diagram over here.
This is the one, and it's the same size, it's the same shape, and we know this particular one was found in a Roman fort of 52 BC. And there are other examples found in Italy. And the interesting thing about that is that's where Julius Caesar raised his legions in North Italy.
It's all starting to stack up, isn't it? With the fort looking likely to have belonged to Julius Caesar, Andrew has started to think about the reasons that motivated his visits. Why do you think Julius Caesar came?
My personal view is he comes for the glory because he's going beyond the known world. For the Romans, the world stops at France. Britain is almost a mythical land. They're still not sure that people really live there. And he brings it under the control of the Roman world. So he achieves great glory because of that.
There must have been some political benefit as well.
Well, one of the key things is what happens afterwards. And this isn't an army of occupation. It's not going to be there with boots on the ground. The way the Romans work for many centuries is they work through the local rulers and they get the local elite to work with them. When Julius Caesar leaves in 54, he does two things. He agrees the amount of tribute that will be paid to Rome, but he also takes hostages. And those hostages are very often the family and the youngsters of the rulers. And it means that Britain is tied into the Roman world, and the kings of Britain become client kings of Rome, and effectively they are part of the Roman Empire.
Caesar's campaign diary provides us with some of the earliest written descriptions of Britain, as well as our first recorded dates. Andrew's made a compelling case for this having been Caesar's fort. And rather than a simple story of conquest, Rome appears to have spent a full century softening up British rulers before finally taking over. I'm dying to meet one of these client kings, So I'm going behind the scenes at the Castle Museum to examine a contender in the form of the Lexden burial, a selection of objects interred with a very important man in Colchester. Crucially, it dates between Caesar's visits to Britain and the final Roman invasion in AD 43.
What grave goods? I mean, they're just gorgeous. Look at this little boar. He is lovely.
The detail is just wonderful, isn't it?
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Really, really beautiful.
You wouldn't believe in some ways that that's 2,000 years old or just over.
He's fantastic.
There's a real Roman flavour to this because the boar, incredibly important to Iron Age people in Britain. They hunted them, they ate them, they even revered them. But this little figurine has a real Roman classical look to him, and it could well have been made in Gaul and imported over here to Britain.
What about this little foot? That's very
This
sweet.
tiny little foot, you can just about make out the toes.
Yep.
He's wearing a little sandal.
I was wearing Birkies. Wearing Birkenstock
Yeah.
sandals, very definitely.
There's a lot of detail there.
So what do you think this was? Was it part of a statue?
No, it's unlike our figurines. I think this is part of a piece of furniture.
Really?
Yeah, which may seem odd, but it's footing for something like a folding chair or stool.
So who had chairs like that?
It would have been some of the most powerful men in Rome, all the way up to the emperor. And indeed, it may even have been gifted if this person was of high enough rank, maybe even a client king here in Britain.
So somebody who was sponsored by the Roman Empire, effectively.
Exactly that,
Yeah.
A connection with the Roman Empire gave this individual great wealth and power, but the last object suggests that this was more than just political expediency. A relationship with Rome seems to have been personally meaningful to this British ruler.
This is a medallion. It's based on a coin of the Emperor Augustus.
Oh, is it?
And what's amazing about this is this gives us a brilliant date for this burial. So this burial can't be earlier than about 15 BC, which is when the coin would have been cast. And it's tempting to think that this is a very personal object and maybe there's some individual relationship here. Maybe not with the emperor, but certainly with the elite in Rome.
So when Claudius arrives in 43 AD, do you imagine that some powerful people in Britain are effectively welcoming him in?
Yes, I think there will be people siding with the Romans, yeah, indeed, especially in the southern part of Britain.
The belongings of this possible client king in Essex provide a rare glimpse of the forgotten relationships that facilitated the final Roman invasion. And as Andrew's post-excavation research on Caesar's fort continues, it will undoubtedly enrich our understanding of the very beginnings of Roman Britain. Rather than rewriting big history, our final story is revealing the forgotten lives of ordinary Britons.
Throughout the 18th century, maritime trade was the mainstay of the British economy, but 1706 saw one of the most catastrophic disasters in all of British seafaring history, when a fleet of 182 ships sailed straight into a winter storm.
They were returning from Virginia in America as part of the so-called Trade Triangle. European goods were sent to West Africa to buy slaves. The slaves were sold to plantations in the Americas, and in return, tobacco, rum, cotton and sugar flowed back into Europe. It was a wretched but lucrative trade. The Hazardous Prize was one of the fleet's escort vessels. It sank on the 19th of November 1706, when bad weather forced it to run aground off Bracklesham Bay. During the early 1700s, thousands of ships were crisscrossing the globe. The lives of the men on board are a vital but forgotten part of our history. Without them, Britain would never have become a maritime power or built its empire. In 2016, a team of local divers and archaeologists launched into a new 2-year excavation of the wreck, funded by Historic England. Their mission was to recover new details about the crew and the realities of 18th century life at sea. They start by constructing a metal grid positioned over the ship's hold so that they can record and locate any new discoveries. Site licensee Ian Grant and archaeologist Dan Pascoe are leading the investigation.
So we put down the frames, and these are going to be the grid that we're going to be working off, doing the excavation. And we've gone from one side going over what looks like a barrel store.
Yeah, there must be at least 5 half barrels and at least 1 complete one by the look of it.
These barrels were used to store provisions for the Hazardous' 280-strong crew. The fact that they're still intact is a promising find and suggests that the wreck may contain many more artefacts. A few weeks into the project, the team make an important discovery related to the men's most crucial job on board.
A really exciting find from today's diving. What it looks like is a powder chamber. The hollow areas where the charge would have been, there would have been a lid on top, and this would have been transported from the powder room up to the guns on the gun deck.
Keeping the many guns of the Hazardous at the ready was a key task for the crew. The warship was responsible for protecting the fleet from the pirates and privateers that terrorised the waves. These weapons are a powerful reminder that the men of the Hazardous must have been constantly wary of attack. Halfway through the project, the divers begin to discover something else: the personal belongings of the crew.
I think the best 2 finds are these buttons. Oh, that one has got a pattern on it. That is... Oh, a horse's head? Yeah, it could be a horse's head.
Non-rock a knight, yeah.
Well, well done, people. Never cease to be amazed, eh?
Along with the buttons, the team begins to discover many more personal items on the seabed. A shoe buckle, a pair of brass dividers used for navigation, and a pewter plate. As Ian and Dan sort through the finds, they begin to build up a vivid picture of the different kinds of lives on board.
So do you think the pewterware was probably officers?
Yes.
Rather than crew?
Yeah, I think the crew probably ate off of wooden platters, wooden bowls at best. But what's the old story about the square meal?
3 square meals a day.
Yeah, and they would have been wooden platters. I don't think ordinary crew would have
had the pewterware.
No.
So even at sea, Britain was a society divided by class. But in the end, class meant little when the men's lives were put under threat. On the 19th of November 1706, after a 3,600-mile journey, the Hazardous prize was within touching distance of home when bad weather closed in.
You get the feeling that the sea's pretty rough just here. I mean, it's a beautiful day today, but really, really rough. So they've come in, they've missed their safe anchorage, they've bumped around all through the night, they've finished up very close to here, and the shore, although it looks no distance to us on a nice day, on a stormy day, I think it probably looks a long way, and all they want to do is get on dry land. So they're not interested in personal effects, they're all left on the site.
The Hazardous was wrecked in Bracklesham Bay, the ferocious waves ripping apart its mighty timbers, condemning the ship to a watery grave. But fortunately, the majority of its men made it to land. It must have been devastating, though, for them to leave all of their precious belongings on board, including one very unusual object that's now providing a valuable insight into the mindset of some of the crew.
So this is the elephant tusk that's come up from the Hazardous prize. Now, this is a ship that's sailing back from Virginia, and forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think they had elephants in Virginia.
No, and it seems most likely that it's come from Africa to America. It may have come on a slave ship, and somebody's bought it and going to take it home.
And this is something that was probably picked up by the officers on board. They might have been bringing it back to make a profit back home.
And this tusk really reminds us of that triangular trade, doesn't it? The fact that the hazardous price herself might not have travelled to Africa, but there are ships going from Africa to the New World, and then other ships coming from the New World back to Britain.
And an opportunity to make a few shillings here and there, however they could.
But the crew of the hazardous prize never got a chance to cash in their exotic acquisitions. And in fact, this wreck was just the last of a string of casualties that year.
So tell me more about the hazardous prize, because this shipwreck is part of a much bigger tragedy, isn't it?
Exactly. It was escorting a merchant fleet that was over in Virginia, in the Americas, and its job was to bring that fleet back safely to England. Unfortunately, it was kind of doomed from the beginning.
Yeah, very much so. There are a catalogue of hold-ups early on in the year, which meant that they didn't actually get to America until July, and the last escort ship, I think, didn't arrive until August. And it meant that they were crossing the Atlantic in really poor conditions.
September is the worst time to leave, as we know from the hurricanes that have just been.
When they got back to England, there was 35 of the original 200-ish merchant ships left.
That's a huge loss.
So massive, massive loss.
Yeah.
Not only did they lose one of their warships, they also lost a large amount of tax revenue. Then on top of that, there was all the personal losses for all the traders. So yeah, it was a major, major tragedy.
I think it's really interesting contrasting this shipwreck of the hazardous prize with the Rosevik, which went down a few decades later. And I think both show you just how risky this was.
Exactly.
The excavation of the hazardous prize is bringing us closer to the forgotten seamen who once plied the Atlantic trading routes, providing new details about their daily lives on board 18th century ships. It's just one discovery in a year that's been jam-packed with new archaeological revelations. From sunken treasure that lays bare the extensive corruption of the East India companies, and writing tablets with the words of the first Londoners, to new evidence of Julius Caesar in Britain. Archaeology is helping us rewrite the story of our island. We may be a small island, but we have a rich and complex history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for lost pieces from our missing past.
A tiny, tiny coin.
Every element is there. This is just unbelievable.
In 2017, their investigations continue to fill in the gaps.
Never cease to be amazed, eh?
Bringing us closer to our ancestors than ever before.
I did not expect to be pulling that out of the ground.
In this programme, Digging for Britain showcases the very best digs from the north of the UK.
Oh, wow. That's rather lovely, Sean.
Each of the excavations has been filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for each exciting moment of discovery.
Oh, Excalibur.
How does that feel, Rupert?
Yeah, pretty good.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can take a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain.
In this programme, we're joining archaeologists in the north to share their biggest discoveries. We visit a site that's turning our image of the mysterious Picts on its head.
What do you think of that, Roy?
Oh, man! Wow!
We're there as a team unearths a spectacular Bronze Age weapons hoard.
We realised very quickly that we had something very important on our hands.
And in Orkney, we join a team battling the elements to rescue a Neolithic settlement older than Skara Brae.
I've come to Edinburgh, to the National Museum of Scotland, to find out how some of the 12 million objects contained in its vast collection can help us to tell the story of the North.
Our first dig takes us south of Edinburgh to the frontier fort of Vindolanda in Northumberland, one of the richest sites in Roman British archaeology. Vindolanda lies just off the Roman frontier of Hadrian's Wall. It was one of the wall's key forts, seeing off repeated uprisings from northern tribes. Excavations have been going on here for nearly 50 years, uncovering thousands of incredible objects.
Every year, archaeologists delve deeper into Roman Vindolanda, and this year they're getting down to a very exciting level, early in the days of the fort, pre-Hadrian's Wall. So can they find evidence that reveals what life was like for those soldiers in a turbulent time for Roman Britain?
This is video diary, day 1 for Dig for Britain at Vindolanda.
Hopes are high because for the first time the team is digging beneath the concrete floor of a barrack block. The remains sealed beneath the concrete have been protected from the corrosive effects of air for nearly 2,000 years. Very quickly the team chances upon a wooden find that, without these special conditions, would have long since rotted away.
What Sam is uncovering here is a wooden artefact, or a series of wooden artefacts. Look at that, that's fantastic, the colour of the wood there. Yes, oh, it's got a handle on it. These are handles. It's amazing, this thing.
I've been here for 7 years, and I honestly think, I don't think I've found anything of that beautiful before. I'm kind of a bit emotional, so it's really quite something.
It's not until they get it to the lab that they work out what it is.
As usual, when things come down to the lab, they get cleaned up beautifully for conservation. And when that happens, you've got to see the detail. You can see the parts of tools, wooden planes, which were used by the Romans to plane off the walls and make their furniture and all the things that they used when they lived in those spaces.
Over the following days, the team unearths hundreds more objects.
So what is it? It's a footprint, possibly a dog, I think probably a dog. It's fantastic. After a while you learn kind of what to look for when you're looking at those kinds of things. So it's great.
The preservation here ensures a vivid picture of everyday life in a Roman fort. But what the team's really hoping for is evidence of those early days of occupation when the Romans were under attack from the British rebels. What they find exceeds all their expectations.
Okay, Rupert, we're going to go for it, okay?
Oh, what's that?
It's a sword, intact and still in its sheath.
It's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing.
A Roman sword was an expensive weapon the owner himself would have paid for, and it's not something a soldier would have casually left lying around.
Something actually still sitting in its sheath. We would never expect to find that, to be honest. In a room that's effectively living space, living quarters, no. That's not the sort of thing you expect them to leave behind.
Military records tell us that in 117 AD, the northern British tribes rebelled against the Romans. But frustratingly, we have little detail of the conflict itself. Does this abandoned sword suggest that the Romans were even more threatened here than we'd thought? The team's next find could bring them closer to the truth.
We think we just found a writing tablet.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, my legs are shaking.
Really.
Let's have a look. So, wait.
Oh my god, you can see something on it.
Yeah.
Can you see it? So,
What they've found is a Roman letter, dropped in exactly the same room as the sword.
That's amazing.
well done, Gary.
The most famous finds to emerge from the fort are the Vindolanda tablets, first discovered in 1973. From birthday invitations to military shopping lists, they give us a unique insight into the lives of the Roman troops and their families in Britain.
If you find the documents from the person who used the sword and they're giving you their opinions and they're talking about their everyday lives, well, that's unbelievable. You can't beat that sort of information.
The new tablet is taken away for conservation in the hope that it will reveal what really happened during the rebellion. As the dig nears its end, the trench reveals one last surprising find.
There we go.
Okay.
Well, congratulations, you found
Thank
yourself
you.
a Roman sword. Well done.
Whoa. I wasn't really expecting this.
It's incredibly rare. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody finding 2 swords in an excavation in a couple of weeks. But obviously they've left these swords here in a hurry. That's the only explanation I can possibly think.
After one of the most exciting seasons of digging at Vindolanda, I'm asking Andrew into the lab to reveal what the dig says about that time of British rebellion and to tell me about finding that first incredibly well-preserved sword.
Andrew, Vindolanda is such a wonderful site. And as you said there, it's so fantastic to have this written evidence as well as all of the objects too. Tell me about the sword though.
Well, it's more or less complete. It's in its scabbard and it was left on the floor by the people who, well, we can only assume left in a hurry, amongst a host of other stuff. You know, an incredible collection of things, really. More than you would expect to find if people are leaving in an orderly fashion, taking all their belongings and their valuables.
Andrew believes that these possessions were abandoned in a period when the Romans were struggling to maintain control here, just before Hadrian's wall was built.
This is a time of British rebellion. This is when the locals around Vindolanda are trying to remove the Roman yoke, and garrisons like the ones at Vindolanda are in trouble. And so either they are leaving to deal with something and they don't have an opportunity to come back and take their valuables with them, or they're packing their bags in such a hurry that they can literally only carry what they can immediately get their hands on. And things like this, sitting in the corner of a room, just get left behind.
It's been overlooked.
Been overlooked.
And what's that?
Well, this is a cavalry junction strap. Now, it looks like gold, but it's not. It's actually bronze, and it would sit on the breast of the horse.
So that's obviously been cleaned up quite a bit since it came out of the ground. Was it covered in green verdigris?
That is more or less the same condition it came out of the ground. In fact, I've got a photograph just over here on the table showing you before we gave it a wash. There we go.
Goodness.
That's it there?
Yeah.
Yeah? And that's what anaerobic conditions at the site do.
It's
Very
such
little
weird
oxygen.
preservation, isn't it? Because on most sites, something like that would have corroded and it would be green.
Bright green lump.
Yeah, it's just astonishing.
Like the sword, this would never have been casually abandoned. And other finds suggest why the Romans might have been keen to flee the northern tribes. They had their wives and children with them.
I particularly love this, a baby boot, because
Can I pick that up?
yeah, please do. No cavalryman's going to be able to squeeze his foot into that.
No.
You know,
So we're not looking at an exclusive military site.
it's not just the soldiers.
Yeah.
It's a real community. There's a, you know, in fact, the soldiers may well have been outnumbered by children wearing shoes like this.
That's astonishing.
Another team digging an even earlier stage of the fort this year also made some incredible finds.
You've had more letters emerging from the sediment at Vindolanda.
Well, we've had a hoard of 25 tablets, some of which have been written by a guy called Masculus to his commanding officer. And this is about 92 AD, so a little bit before this barrack was operational. He's a decurion, he's a cavalry commander, and he's asking for leave for his men.
Yeah.
And he's saying, look, can I have leave for 30 of my men? And then he changes his mind. He just crosses the 30 out and writes 50 above.
Yeah.
He doesn't even bother rewriting the letter. So he's obviously got a really good relationship with his commanding officer.
Back in the barracks, in the layer associated with the rebellion, the team eventually found 9 more tablets.
It looked as though you'd found tablets from the same time as this.
We found about 10 writing tablets from this cavalry barrack, you know, from the rooms where things like this sword came from. So can one of those documents tell us about that moment or the build up to that moment in time when these artifacts have to be deposited? We've got documents from the room where the sword was found. Does it mention the owner of that sword? We're just going to have to wait to find out. It's a long process to decipher the tablets. It takes 6 to 12 months for them to be conserved and then to be decoded. But yeah, we've got some fun to come.
I can't believe you've got letters from the same room. That's just brilliant. And come back next year and tell us what they say.
Okay, you got a deal.
More analysis of the swords and those new letters will give us even greater insights into the early phase of the fort. But this fantastic season at Vindolanda has already revealed that the Romans may have been far more vulnerable in the early years of conquest than we'd ever previously thought. Our next dig takes us nearly 200 miles north to the remote Scottish island of Iona, as archaeologists look for evidence of one of Britain's earliest monasteries and traces of its legendary founder.
Iona is Scotland's most famous sacred site, and its history goes back nearly 1,500 years to one man, Saint Columba. Arriving in 563 AD, he put Iona on the map.
From this remote island parish, legend says he set out to convert Scotland from a country of heathen barbarians to one full of Christians. Columba built a monastery here with 12 followers. It became a celebrated centre for theological learning. But in the centuries after Columba's death, legends say that Iona grew into an important pilgrimage site, drawing Christians from across Europe. And scholars have even suggested that its layout may have been based on the holy city of Jerusalem. With no trace of the original buildings, we have no idea if these legends are true. This year, archaeologists are determined to find out.
Here we are, day 1 of 3 weeks of excavation on the famous Iona Abbey.
Adrian Maldonado is leading the team from Glasgow University. They're following in the footsteps of Professor Charles Thomas, who in 1956 first excavated here to see if he could find evidence of the legendary monastery. He found some intriguing remains, but lacked the technology to date them, and the mystery endured.
We're going back to a few of his trenches here at Iona and re-excavating them and recording them to a modern standard.
The present abbey was built in the 13th century, 600 years after Columba's death. But the team are hoping to find evidence of the original monastic site around it. So they start investigating what looks like the boundary, or vallum. Most monasteries are surrounded by an outer enclosure, and in Columba's time, this would have been an earthen bank and ditch. But one of the first things the team finds is a memento left by the 1950s team. Wine bottles.
The archaeology of the archaeologists.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they did say that this year they were digging this trench, it was monsoon-like conditions.
Wow.
So it's quite possible that they've had a bad season and spent quite a lot of time drinking by the look of it.
Fortunately, this 21st century team are having better weather. And Kathy soon finds some organic matter she can use to date the vallum.
At the very base of the ditch, we've come across a nice reddish peaty layer, and we're able to see remnants of straw, or maybe even silver birch twigs, so I suspect it's a deliberate deposit. So hopefully if we're able to date this material, we'll be able to date something that happened fairly soon after the ditch was cut.
Meanwhile, Adrian has been using geophysical surveying equipment to map out the full site. This means that without having to excavate, he can trace the remains of buildings lost beneath the ground and hopefully establish the size and complexity of that original monastery.
We've been doing geophysical survey this week alongside the trenches down below us. And what is shown is that the vallum did indeed continue through all these fields. And so there's a possibility that we are looking at a monastic sanctuary enclosure or vallum that has grown over the years and they've had to expand.
These results suggest that a huge bank and ditch enclosed an area of nearly 9 hectares. And the radiocarbon dating analysis from Cathy's vallum sample reveals that it was constructed as early as the 7th century. Spurred on, the team want to find out what stood within this enclosure, as a major site of pilgrimage would have had a number of different buildings for pilgrims to visit and pray in.
This is day 6 of the Iona project, and we're opening a new trench here, as you can see.
In the 1950s, Thomas exposed an intriguing section of stone wall. To see where it leads, the Glasgow team extend their trench.
We've discovered this nice curving piece of wall here, which would seem to indicate an apse or an apsidal end of a building, and that is really exciting because that indicates a church.
The apse is a curved stone wall usually found in churches. But lab analysis suggests that this wall could date back to the 7th century, which would be extraordinary because at this time almost all churches were built from wood. Whatever this structure was, this date, if true, would make it the earliest stone-built feature ever discovered on a Scottish monastery, suggesting that Iona was a site of stature and importance. And in the same trench, the team find evidence for industry at the site.
This big black layer that runs through here is absolutely chock full of iron slag, the result of producing iron for presumably fittings for the abbey. It really was a hive of activity. It wasn't just a quiet place of contemplation.
Even more excitingly, there's evidence that this community had international connections.
This is probably fairly local material, but other materials they were bringing in, like tin and gold and silver from other places, glass from the Mediterranean and so on. So very wide-ranging contacts, bringing all this material to the site because it was so important.
This is such an intriguing site, but has the mystery been cracked? Does the evidence suggest that early Iona was big enough to have been a pilgrimage site? And does the layout resemble Jerusalem at all? I've invited Adrian into the lab to talk through the evidence so far. It's fantastic to go back to such an important site in terms of the early church in Scotland and St Columba himself.
Yeah, it's what we have of him is the legend that grows a century after he dies.
So in terms of the layout of the whole site then, I think the important thing that you've discovered seemed to be this vallum.
Yes. So what's marked here and picked out in red is the vallum, or the monastic enclosure of the site. This was a massive ditch which went down 3 meters into the earth. And presumably the rampart, the bank on the inside of that would have been the same height again.
Yeah.
So this is much more than you need to mark this sort of sacred enclosure. You know?
And what about Iona being this Jerusalem of the north, a site for pilgrimage? Do you really think it was that important as an early pilgrimage site?
This is one of the things that comes out of these excavations. What we've got here is this schematic layout, and this would have been the main church. This is the tomb of St. Columba. The high crosses would have been around here, and St. Oran's Church, which is still there and still in use, just over here. So this is our vision of the layout of that early medieval monastery. And this is the schematic plan of Jerusalem, of the Holy Land. If you look at the sort of two schematic plans put together, you can see the similarities. The church to the east, the true cross, and the enclosure of the chalice being where the well is now.
So you think they're trying to recreate the layout of Jerusalem effectively on Iona. When is this happening? Can you put a date on this?
Well, it seems to be happening from as early as 100 years after Columba dies.
So which century?
So this is the end of the 7th century.
And do you think this layout is crucial to the experience of pilgrims visiting the site?
Absolutely. If you imagine this sort of graded entrance, so by the time you come down and you are there, you are faced with the tomb of St. Columba, you are in the shrine, you are sort of overwhelmed. You are experiencing or getting as close to heaven on earth as you can possibly get without going to Jerusalem itself.
It's quite an extraordinary thing to do. It's like early medieval virtual reality.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's one way of putting it, sure.
Spanning nearly 15 centuries, Iona is a hugely complex site, but the traces of early monastic Christianity are still there to find. And this new excavation has provided datable evidence, taking us right back to the earliest monastery on the island. In our next dig, we cross to the east of Scotland, to Carnoustie, where a chance find in farmland is changing our understanding of how British society was organised during the Bronze Age, 3,000 years ago.
Sometimes archaeologists will choose a particular site to excavate with certain questions in mind or specific hypotheses that they want to test. But a lot of British archaeology is carried out at sites that are going to be developed. The archaeologists move in first to excavate and glean what information they can before the developers turn up and a new road or housing estate is built. Now, these sites can often produce surprising and unexpected discoveries.
This was the case when a team came to Carnoustie to excavate a field before it was converted into 2 school football pitches. They already knew of intriguing crop marks in nearby farmland, which hinted at a prehistoric settlement in the area. But what they found at Carnoustie would exceed all their expectations.
This is where we started topsoil stripping in 2016, and during the course of removing the topsoil we unearthed a number of buildings, all prehistoric in date.
They'd found the remains of a group of roundhouses, suggesting something incredibly rare, a Bronze Age village. In the houses, the team unearthed domestic items like pottery fragments and weaving tools. But the best was yet to come.
Well, we were proceeding to strip topsoil across the site with a machine, and one of my colleagues saw something on the ground. You could tell straight away it was a blade. And lying next to it, there was another object with a gold-decorated end to it. And we realised very quickly that we had something very important on our hands.
The sword and the gold object was so fragile that the team brought the whole 80-kilogram block of soil back for excavation in their Glasgow lab.
Oh man! Wow! I did not see that from my photograph. Ah.
What they'd found was a weapons hoard. Bronze Age weapons are often found in water or boggy ground. They're thought to be religious offerings. But finding a hoard in the middle of a village is very rare, suggesting that these weapons might be personal possessions buried close to home. As the soil fell away, the true magnitude of the discovery was revealed. The sword's blade shows visible signs of combat. Not only that, lying next to it was an exceptionally rare spearhead, decorated with gold and bearing the remnants of the fur that it was once wrapped in.
The fact that these organics survived, it's just unprecedented. It's nice to think that these items weren't just ceremonial, they may well have had actual use in warfare.
It's incredibly unusual to have this level of decoration on a Bronze Age weapon. It does suggest that it must have belonged to a powerful man. But what's really fascinating is that just 17 miles away, at Pyat Dykes Farm, an ornate, almost identical spearhead was found. So is it possible that northern Britain was controlled by a network of Bronze Age warrior chiefs? To find out more, I've asked Blair to join me in the lab. And Blair, here they are. Absolutely wonderful find.
It was an extraordinary find.
And what about the sword then? Because I was intrigued to see that you think it's been used. Some of these nicks, you think, then are not from, you know, sort of damage since it's been in the ground, but actually damage from having been used as a weapon.
I think so. These do look as though they are of some antiquity.
So that's really important because it means it's not just a ceremonial item, it's actually an item which it was designed for use.
Well, that's right. Good agricultural land was probably very, very sought after and desirable, so you might have to fight to acquire it, and then you might have to fight to retain it. So the weapons could well have been, in part, about controlling your territories.
Do you have a precise date for this hoard yet?
Yes, we do. That arrived actually only yesterday.
Oh, really?
And the date that was returned was around 1000 BC, which really fits very nicely into this sort of late Bronze Age period in Scotland.
In the Bronze Age, a new social hierarchy emerged, and it's possible that the owner of these weapons belonged to one of an elite group of high-status warriors. When you look at this with this gold detail, surely that is higher status.
Well, that is, yes. I mean, there have been a handful of these found in Britain and Ireland before, so it's beginning to look like subdivision and occupation of the landscape was perhaps controlled by Bronze Age overlords, if you like, very wealthy, powerful men who governed, managed almost parishes of land, if you like.
And what about the rest of the analysis? Because I know that you've also been looking at the metal itself to try to determine where it's come from.
That's right. Well, the gold has been looked at, but it doesn't seem to originate from Scotland, so it's possibly from Ireland or England.
So we're seeing connections with the wider world.
That's right, yeah.
I think this is an absolutely fantastic site. We've got to link back potentially to a Bronze Age chieftain who lived 3,000 years ago, and I'm sure this isn't the last we're going to hear of Carnoustie.
Probably not.
The Carnoustie hoard is remarkable. Its burial in the village suggests that it was simply being hidden or stored rather than being an offering to the gods. It calls into question the interpretation of other Bronze Age hoards. And some of the treasures at the National Museum of Scotland can help us set the finds at Carnoustie in the wider context of the European Bronze Age.
The wealth of Scotland's Bronze Age elite wasn't built in isolation. It was the result of extensive trading networks that connected Scotland not only with the rest of the British Isles, but with mainland Europe beyond.
As curator Alison Sheridan is about to show me, with the museum's spectacular Balmashana hoard, found not far from Carnoustie.
There's a wonderful selection of things. And is that amber?
Yes, it is, and it's got a fantastic story because we think that the amber started its life as raw material in Denmark and then was taken over to Ireland where it was made up into the necklace. And of course, Scotland was kind of midway between them.
So it's a kind of stop-off point on these trade routes?
Yeah, but I think it's more than that, so that the elite who were living in this part of Scotland would have been very active players in this interaction network. So if we look at these little things here, they're called tress rings because we think they were worn in their hair. These are of a fashion that you find elsewhere in Ireland, but also in Belgium and northern France.
So this hoard, much like the weapons found nearby in Carnoustie, suggests a region where warrior chieftains acquired valuable objects using their international connections. The Carnoustie sword and spearhead are not just weapons, they are emblems of power and status.
As part of propping up their power structure, it was important for people to demonstrate that they were in contact with their counterparts elsewhere. And so they were sharing their fashions. They looked alike, they had the same weaponry, and they indulged in things like feasting. So you would invite, your counterparts to come. They also had combat, set-piece combat. Whether they actually invited people to come and dine and then killed them all, we don't know. But yes, it was this international culture club, if you like.
It may just be that the Bronze Age warrior who buried his weapons at Carnoustie was part of this well-connected European high society. Our next dig transports us into the Roman period, and to East Lomond in Fife, where a newly discovered settlement is completely rewriting the story of the mysterious Pictish tribes of Scotland.
Our understanding of the people who lived beyond that northern boundary of the Roman Empire in Britain, people that the Romans would later refer to as the Picts, is hazy, and it is largely based on the classical sources. To the Romans, the people of Scotland were savages and barbarians.
When the Romans invaded Britain nearly 2,000 years ago, they failed to conquer the northern tribes. Since they couldn't subdue them, they kept their barbaric neighbours at arm's length by building Hadrian's Wall, and they lumped them together as the Painted People, or Picti.
Now, new archaeological discoveries are challenging that Roman view of history, leading us to question what that relationship between the Romans and their neighbours to the north of Hadrian's Wall was really like.
In 2014, a team discovered an ancient settlement on East Lomond Hill. What the archaeologists revealed was something quite extraordinary. The remains of a sophisticated metal workshop from the 7th century. It suggested a rather different picture from the painted savages that the Romans had earlier described. This year, they're digging even deeper to see if they can find more evidence to challenge the Roman caricature of the Picts.
Join us here at East Lomond Hill Fort, where we're on day 2 of our excavation, and suffice to say we're revealing some really interesting finds.
Quickly they unearth something that looks neither savage nor barbaric.
Oh my gosh, it's big, isn't it?
Nice there, Roy, that's great work. Roy is just excavating what we think may be a large part of a shale armlet. It's looking to be in a very good state. Exciting. What do you think of that, Roy? Well done.
It's incomplete, but an armlet like this would have been a highly valued piece of jewellery.
So that's been sitting there since the Iron Age. We've just got it out. Extraordinary.
This Pictish armlet dates to the Roman period and suggests that the Picts at this site had a liking for beautiful things.
It's only going to get better as we go into the latter part of second week and into our third week here.
Oliver's right. On day 15, there's fresh evidence of refined Pictish tastes.
Okay, Bob, you just made a really nice discovery here. Do you want to take us through it?
I thought I saw something there. And lo and behold, out came this beautiful little bead.
It is beautiful. So we lift it out and just have a little closer look at it. So that looks probably Roman.
I did not expect to be pulling that out of the ground today.
Yeah, beautiful thing.
This glass bead is almost certainly of Roman origin. Could its presence here suggest the Romans and Picts were not the sworn enemies we'd understood them to be?
Are you pleased with that?
Well,
And then on the final day, there is further evidence of contact with the Romans.
There's only literally half an hour left of the day, so let's see what you've got. Let's hope it's something special.
It has got a lip on it.
Wow, you think it's a rim of something, though, Joy?
Yeah, it looks like it could be.
It's very fine glass. So this could be Roman glass. Could be. It's a nice wee find to finish on, eh?
It certainly is.
Great stuff.
This fragment of glass may have formed part of an elaborate Roman drinking vessel. But the big question is, how did these Roman items get here, and what is the truth about the relationship between the Romans and the Picts? I've invited the team into the lab to share their conclusions.
What an intriguing sight. It certainly suggests that Hadrian's Wall wasn't this impenetrable barrier between the north and the south.
No, absolutely. Here you've got a site that's 152 miles north of Hadrian's Wall, and there's clearly Roman contact going on here, which has not been known about before. Until 2014, we didn't know this existed. So this is a surprise to us as well.
So that's the shale bracelet, isn't it? The shale armlet.
That's the shale bracelet.
Can I pick it up?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite light.
It's light.
Yeah.
And you can see the working marks on the shale.
And unfinished, of course.
Yeah.
And it's clearly a status symbol. You know, this is an armlet supposed to go up on the bicep.
How do you know it's unfinished?
Well, normally they're finely polished, where you get the complete piece. It's meant to be a beautiful ring.
So this has just been kind of roughed out.
That's right.
And that's part of its value. It takes a long time to make. You know, it's a big investment in an agricultural community. You know, somebody has to really work at that.
So when does this date to?
So we can be firmly confident that we're looking at late Roman period, 3rd, 4th century AD.
This armlet alone challenges the Roman portrayal of the Picts. These were clearly a people who had developed refined tastes. But the Roman items on the site beg the question of what kind of contact the Picts actually had with those invading Romans.
They are all sherds of late Roman beakers, drinking vessels. So these are what we think are feasting gear. And they've come from the Roman world, so probably produced in Roman Britain itself, so 3rd, 4th century. And how did they get here? Well, it doesn't necessarily speak of violent raiding to us. You know, is there a role for gift giving here? Is this a diplomatic gift? There's a relationship here.
So the Romans are telling us this story of the Picts being unreconstructed barbarians, troublesome neighbours to the north. This suggests there was a different kind of relationship going on then.
The earliest sources, when you look at Tacitus's Agricola, is as much propaganda, I suspect, as an accurate description of what they were encountering. It's not all barbaric. It's actually quite a civilised engagement.
I just think it's extraordinary, you know, that we're no longer seeing the north beyond the wall as being this sort of isolated land, but actually somewhere that it is connected.
The finds at this year's dig are convincing proof that there was a connection between the savage Picts and the civilised Romans. And another recently discovered find, now here at the National Museum of Scotland, even suggests that this interaction was deliberate Roman policy.
In 2015, archaeologists came across one of the most decisive pieces of evidence to date, a hoard of Roman silver buried deep in the Pictish heartland. And I'm about to get a sneak preview before it goes on display. Oh, Fraser, this is so exciting. We're able to open the cabinet up and get close to the objects. So these are objects which are part of your brand new silver exhibition.
Yeah, this is for Scotland's early silver. We've got this new find from Fife, never seen in public display before.
And there's some really large pieces here. I mean, it has been hacked about. You can kind of see what they were.
You can now, thanks to the conservation. This came to us as 400 fragments, and our conservators have been working at it for hundreds of hours to try to piece the various bits together. But this isn't just a barbarian chopping things to bits.
Yeah.
This is done inside the Roman world and sent north as a weight of silver.
Right, so it's not actually about the objects anymore, it's just about their monetary worth.
Yeah, this is just bullion. This is sending a weight of silver north to buy peace or pay off mercenaries or something like that.
So what are these vessels then? You've got what looks like a bowl here, and then you've got what looks like a silver brandy snap.
Yes. Yeah, most likely we think a flawed casting. They've tried to make a vessel from it. It's failed, so they've just, rather than melting it down again, they've used it as a weight of silver.
Now, are you sure that's the way round it was happening? I mean, couldn't this have been troublesome Picts marauding south of the wall, pillaging and plundering, and then taking Roman silver back with them?
Well, that used to be the interpretation of this stuff, but when you look at it carefully, you find a lot of it is cut up to regular shapes, to regular sizes, and often to Roman weight standards. So you can see with this one, the cut marks down the side there.
Yeah.
Although the cut marks are quite rough, it's quite carefully done as a quarter of a vessel.
Is it all about maintaining peace, or is there something that the Romans want north of the wall?
Well, it may not just be about peace, it may also be about soldiers, because at this time the Roman army is getting stretched and they're drawing in effectively mercenaries from a variety of other areas. So this could equally be the payment to somebody who's been serving in the Roman army.
Gosh, that's extraordinary, to think that there could have been Picts being recruited into the Roman army. So when does this date to?
This dates to around about AD 300. And this is actually the earliest evidence we have from all across Europe for this kind of hack silver coming north beyond the frontier. So it's a frontier-wide policy trying to control what's happening to the north.
This amazing hoard transforms our understanding of the conflict between the British tribes and the Romans. Perhaps the relationship wasn't always as hostile as we previously thought. Our next dig takes us to Newark, and to a very definite conflict over 1,000 years later. Archaeologists here are shedding light on one of the most bitter and divisive moments in our history: the English Civil War. The countryside surrounding Newark may look green and pleasant today, but 370 years ago, this was the site of a long, drawn-out siege, so gruelling it would see the king and his royalist cavaliers surrendering to parliamentarian Roundheads fighting for Oliver Cromwell.
The Siege of Newark was one of the most pivotal moments in British history, marking the end of 4 years of conflict that tore the country apart and eventually saw the monarch deposed. But remarkably, traces of the siege itself are thin on the ground.
We tend to associate the Civil War with short, brutal battles, but the defining moment came with the Siege of Newark, which lasted 6 months and drew in around 16,000 soldiers from across the country. Now, a team of archaeologists from the universities of Central Lancashire and Sheffield is digging here, hoping to find precious evidence of how this decisive siege played out on the ground.
What we're excavating at the moment is what we call a redoubt. It's a very, very small square fortification to put a gun on. We've got evidence for the rampart, which you'd expect. So hopefully, as the dig progresses, we'll start to go down even further and find evidence of occupation.
This gun battery was part of a network of fortifications laid by the besieging forces. And this one was built by Scottish troops, recruited by the parliamentarians to help starve out the royalists holed up in the town. evidence of the besiegers quickly emerges.
Just come across a really, really exciting find. So Sabrina here is literally just lifting it from the earth as we speak. And this actually has to be the best find we've found so far.
Sabrina's intriguing find looks like it might have been part of a uniform.
It's got 2 rivets here, which means it attaches to a belt. Some beautiful 17th century decoration on it. And complete examples of these have actually been identified as sword belt fittings. You'd have 3 of them, you'd have little hooks, and from those hooks will be suspended your scabbard. So this is really, really important, because actually it's the first kind of proper military find that we have that really, really shows us that the Scots were here during the final siege.
Unlike the Civil War battles, the siege lasted 6 months, and Rachel and the team are hoping it will give a rare glimpse into the lives of the soldiers on the front line.
As you can see, we're getting the final last few crumbs from the trench.
Rachel.
But, ooh. Oh, wow. That's rather lovely, Sean. It is, in fact, a little copper alloy thimble. So, quite a wonderful find.
And as they dig deeper, the team gets further glimpses of the lives of the soldiers here.
Just out of here, we've just come across this. So we've had bits of clay pipe before. And as you can see from this one, it's a really nice example. It's still got the little spur on it, which you could sort of rest on a table. But also, because we've got bits of the bowl, we can estimate how large it would have been and therefore what sort of date. And this is probably a 17th century pipe. Who knows, you know, 350 years ago, you might have had a Scotsman sat on this very spot, puffing away and contemplating the hardships of sieges.
The small Scottish redoubt gives us a fascinating window into the lives of 17th century soldiers. Now I want to find out how they fitted into the bigger story of the Civil War and helped to bring down the king. So I've invited Rachel's colleague, Hugh Wilmot, into the lab.
Well, thank you, Hugh, for stepping into the fray. Rachel can't be here because I understand that she's due to have her baby imminently.
Imminently, yes.
So I can recognise some of the things that she was showing us there, and it's really interesting to get these insights into the sort of everyday lives of the soldiers. I mean, I love this thimble.
Absolutely.
Would that have belonged to a soldier?
Quite probably. I mean, it's unlikely that there may have been sort of women present on this site because it's a very small fortification. And if you look at the size of it, it's actually quite a large thimble.
Oh, it is. My finger's rattling around in it.
I know.
Can you fit it on your finger?
I mean, that's a loose fit for me.
That's a man's thimble.
So, you could quite easily see a soldier mending his uniform or something with that, because obviously they had to rely on very limited supplies. If their uniforms came tatty, they would have to repair them. They wouldn't be able to get new ones easily.
And can we see where all these beautiful finds come from on this map? This is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Newark in the centre of the map, and this is the Royalist fortification. This is the Scottish headquarters, nicknamed Edinburgh.
Nice, yeah.
And the finds came from this little sort of feature here, which is marked as the Scots Redoubt, which is the square feature that Rachel was excavating.
And is it important to the parliamentarians to have this extra assistance from the Scots?
Oh, it's crucial. It tips the course of the war. Prior to the Scots joining in 1643, the two parties are at stalemate pretty much. The Scottish army adds extra numbers, but also it breaks some of the power base of the Royalists who are in the north of England.
So eventually the parliamentarian forces that are laying siege to Newark, they would win this siege?
They do. They have to wait 6 months, and it's really not their own actions that win the siege. It's actually this outbreak of plague that occurs in the spring, and eventually they do actually give up the town.
This gun battery gives us not only a rare picture of the Scottish troops, key to toppling the monarchy, but also a unique insight into a defining chapter in the Civil War. Our final dig takes us to the far reaches of northern Scotland, to the island of Sanday in Orkney, and an investigation into an ancient settlement of Britain's earliest farmers. Generations of archaeologists have excavated these islands, revealing that Orkney was home to thriving settlements 5,000 years ago, including the remarkably preserved houses of the Neolithic village of Skara Brae. But until recently, there'd been no sign of human habitation on this part of Sanday. So when archaeologists chanced upon what looked like Bronze Age tools sticking out of the beach at Catter Sands, they were really excited.
Any discovery here provides us with a rare opportunity to find out more about Orkney's amazing prehistory. But the archaeologists are really up against it. After thousands of years of lying hidden in the sands, this site is in real danger of being swept away. So can the team act fast enough and recover those precious clues before they're finally lost forever?
The team can only dig when the tide is out.
22nd of August, tide coming in. As you can see, it's going to get higher day by day.
It's hard to imagine perhaps in this sunshine, but they're at the mercy of the elements. The weather can change at any time.
You can see quite clearly here that the storm over the last couple of days has actually exposed quite a lot of the archaeology. And this is essentially how this site has been first exposed and then eroded.
As the surface layers are removed, the team discovers what they'd hoped for, the outline of a house.
We've now defined the edge of the wall quite nicely. So now we're in a position where we've got the internal floor layers now showing up. The next job, now that we've defined the location of the house, is really to get into these floor deposits and try and see what was going on in the house.
They suspect that this is part of a late Neolithic settlement, built like Skara Brae 5,000 years ago, and from their finds they think that it lasted into the Bronze Age. But as they dig further, they quickly make an unexpected discovery.
You can see we found a Neolithic hearth. You can see the altar stacks here of a hearth, which is quite a rectangular shape.
The shape of the hearth is surprising. Unlike the square hearths of Skara Brae, it's rectangular, which suggests it could date to much earlier. Could this be evidence of the predecessors of the people who founded Skara Brae? If so, it will offer a rare opportunity, promising to reveal more about Britain's first farmers and how they transformed the landscape. I've invited Vicky and Jane into the lab to show me those prehistoric stone tools that first alerted them to the existence of the site at Catter Sands.
What an incredible site.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's fantastic. How did you discover it?
Well, we were walking along that beach one day when it was really, really windy, so we had to have our noses really close to the ground to stop the sand getting in our eyes. And we started seeing tools much like these, actually, these great big ugly looking things.
See, I find that quite amazing that you walked along a beach and looked at those and thought they were anything other than just natural rocks, but they're not natural.
No, they're actually Bronze Age tools that were used for cultivation. So this is a roughly shaped mattock, so you can see the business end is down here and it would have been hafted here.
Yeah.
So these are flaked stone bars, and this is the same kind of idea, only this one was used as the point of a plough. So these are very characteristic of the early Bronze Age.
These are Bronze Age, are they? But you think you've got earlier layers there as well?
Yeah, so this key artefact, if you look at it on that side, it has a dimpled area, and then if you turn it over, it's extremely flat, isn't it?
It's completely flat. So that's been ground flat.
Mm-hmm. So this is a grinder, and it's also called a Napahawa grinder because they come from an early Neolithic site called the Napahawa on Papua Westry. So that would be associated with grinding
grain, but in the very early Neolithic time when people were first farming in Orkney.
So it's pushing it back and back and back. This looks like it could still be Bronze Age, and then you're going back in time and saying, well, actually, this looks a bit more like early Neolithic.
Yeah.
It is quite incredible, isn't it, this point where we get the Neolithic taking hold, because this is a massive change in people's lives. They've been hunter-gatherers up until this point, and suddenly they become farmers.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the broader early Neolithic story of Britain and that first occupation of Britain by pioneering farmers. And I think Orkney would have been an exceptionally rich environment for people to move into. It's got very fertile land. It would have been perfect for early farmers coming in with grain and crops and animals. And it would have been a wonderful place for them to live.
After so much archaeological scrutiny of Orkney, it is incredible that Cata Sands is revealing new secrets about our Neolithic ancestors. It will be fascinating to see what future digs here can reveal about this period of the agricultural revolution. Scything through the landscape of northern Britain is Hadrian's Wall, our most famous Roman monument. It was built nearly 2,000 years ago as a dividing line, separating Roman lands in the south from the barbarians to the north. At the heart of the wall's story is a band of forgotten warriors. They are the Roman Cavalry. For over a century, historians and archaeologists have been unearthing clues about the Roman cavalry, helping to build a picture of their forgotten world. And now, Digging for Britain is going to join this search. At archaeological digs,
they're marrying with the people who, generations ago, they actually conquered.
At overlooked Roman sites.
So these are serious military bases holding hundreds of people.
And in museums and archives.
Starting to really build up this lovely picture of who these people are.
This year, an international team of archaeologists, historians and reenactors have come together using the latest evidence to restore the cavalry to their rightful place in the story of the Roman Empire.
As part of this collaboration, a team of modern riders has been recruited for a unique historical display which will celebrate the power and splendour of the Roman cavalry.
This is one of the most challenging things that I've done.
This project, combined with new research, will allow us to examine how those elusive warriors lived and reveal their crucial role in conquering and controlling Roman Britain.
Each new piece of information comes together to help us tell the forgotten story of Rome's secret weapon, its cavalry.
When we think of the Romans in Britain, we tend to focus on the foot soldiers, the legionaries. But in fact, the Roman cavalry was central to their military strategy and success. But these elite warriors have vanished from the public imagination.
Even in the Roman era, it was the foot soldiers, the legionaries, who hogged the limelight. But the Roman cavalry were at the heart of some of Rome's greatest victories, and they were key to running and defending that vast empire.
The cavalry were far fewer in number than the infantry, but vital in conquering and controlling Rome's sprawling empire. But everything we know about them has to be pieced together from small clues found in ancient literature or unearthed at archaeological digs. In 2017, 10 museums along Hadrian's Wall brought for the first time all of these fragments of evidence together to create a major exhibition celebrating the legacy of these ancient warrior horsemen. The climax of this project, a live cavalry reenactment involving 30 modern riders. they're attempting to stage a Roman cavalry tournament, a test of skill and bravery, which no one has seen for over 1,600 years.
They're drawing on history, on painstakingly translated ancient documents, as well as the latest archaeological revelations in order to bring to life one of the most dazzling spectacles of the Roman world.
And it's providing the academics with a unique opportunity to discover something new. By putting their theories into practice, they hope to find out how the cavalry rode, how their kit was worn and actually worked, and what battle tactics they might have brought with them to Britain.
This experimental archaeology takes us out of the realm of guesswork and moves us into an area where we can start to make some reasonable estimates as to what's possible. It doesn't give us the answer, but it's every bit as valid as field work.
As the team prepares for the big show, I'm going to seek out evidence the cavalry left behind to help build a picture of their role in Roman Britain. My journey begins in Northumberland, on Hadrian's Wall itself. When the Emperor Hadrian came to power in 117 AD, he launched a vast building scheme to consolidate the sprawling frontiers of the empire he'd inherited. He built a new line of defences snaking across 3,000 miles of his frontier, from North Africa to the Black Sea and on through Central Europe to Britain. In northern England, Hadrian's project was realised as an impassable wall 15 feet high, stretching 75 miles from coast to coast. It was designed to keep out the wild British tribes who lived to the north.
On a day like this, you can imagine being a Roman soldier and being pretty disgruntled at having been stationed here on Hadrian's Wall, on the very northern boundary of this wonderful empire, looking out at the land of the barbarians over there. But I think what's really interesting me today is finding out how our ideas of the wall have evolved over time, and that's all about new archaeological discoveries.
I want to find out why Hadrian's Wall became the centre of operations for the Roman cavalry. To get some answers, I'm meeting one of the leading experts on how Hadrian's Wall worked, Matt Simmons. Matt has minutely researched the 80 small forts dotted along the wall, which we now know as mile castles.
This is a building attached to the wall then, Matt. What is it?
It is. It's a building known as a mile castle, and this particular one is Mile Castle 37.
So if this is a mile castle, does that mean there were actually small forts like this every mile along Hadrian's Wall?
Essentially, yes. There is a small amount of leeway allowed, but it is an incredibly regimented and ordered system. And it is a radical departure from what the Roman army was doing before.
These mile castles saw the Roman army rip up its traditional approach to defence, which had been based on temporary wooden forts. Here in northern England, they built a continuous line of permanent stone forts, all linked by this defensive wall.
That is an incredibly close surveillance system, and it must almost certainly be about making sure you had people in the right positions to stop them from sneaking over the wall unobserved. So if you like, it's an early warning system. The number of soldiers based in a mile castle would have been very, very small indeed. Maybe only 8 in that small barrack block over there. But it looks as though there was a major change of plan during the construction process.
As Hadrian's Wall was being built, the plan evolved. As well as those small mile castles, the Roman army also began to build a series of huge, heavily defended forts into the line of the wall itself.
So these are serious military bases holding hundreds of people, a far cry from the 8 or so, the handful of people you'd find in here.
Perhaps the most famous and dramatic of all of these forts is Housesteads. And crucially, the Romans filled forts like this not just with ordinary foot soldiers, but with cavalrymen. Perhaps that was a reaction to the ferocity of the native Britons to the north, or just a bureaucratic decision from on high. Whatever the reason, from this point on, these forts and their cavalry became key to defending Hadrian's Wall.
When you think about the frontier, we mustn't just think about this line. It's a crucial part of it, but there's a much wider frontier zone. And by having concentrated forces, and in particular by having cavalry, you have that strike force to the north and indeed to the south, should you need it. So it's about really enhancing that capability.
So it's about controlling a zone rather than
Exactly.
just having this line.
Yeah, the Romans wanted it all. They're controlling a line and they're controlling zones to either side.
Just looking at this landscape, you can see why the Romans decided to move their cavalry onto Hadrian's Wall. Fast horsemen could move quickly to cut off the first signs of trouble from the native Britons. Not far from here is another of these huge forts built into Hadrian's Wall. This one was built at a strategic crossing of the River Tyne, at a place now called Chester's. In its heyday, it was home to 500 cavalrymen and their horses. New discoveries here are helping to reveal why the Roman cavalry was such an effective fighting force. To discover more, I'm meeting Kevin Booth of English Heritage. One of the most recognisable parts of the fort is its living quarters, or barracks. Barrack blocks are similar right across the Roman Empire, but there was always a mystery at cavalry bases. There was plenty of accommodation for the soldiers, but where were the stables? The answer emerged in the late 1990s when archaeologists in Newcastle made a remarkable discovery. During excavations of a similar barrack block, they found a series of shallow pits, and it was realised that these were rudimentary drains for horses' urine. So the men and the horses were in fact living in the same buildings.
In each of these spaces you've got 3 men and 3 horses living side by side.
So there would have been 3 men and 3 horses in just this space?
It does seem quite extraordinary, and with a relatively narrow doorway. In fact, we're stood pretty much on the line of the partition between the front half with the horses and the men at the back.
It would have been pretty dank and smelly in here, I imagine.
To our sensibilities, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I suppose you get used to it, don't you?
It seems like a peculiar setup. I mean, why wouldn't they have stables elsewhere? Why are they kind of forcing the men and the horses in together?
It's intimate, and perhaps that's the point. You're maintaining that strong bond between the man and his horse, and that is also to do with finance. You know, the horse essentially is paid for out of the Roman soldier's wages. He has a financial investment in it. And I think also if you've got a fort that has 500 horses in it, hygiene and good maintenance is all. And then also, if you need to get out of the north gate of this fort at speed, you're ready, you're prepared, you're away.
So you're on call here in the barracks, ready to jump on your horse and set off at any time?
Absolutely, permanently.
These men must have had a uniquely close relationship with their horses, which is hard for us to understand. They lived side by side and fought together. To try to understand how the Roman cavalry rode and fought on horseback, I'm meeting the leader of the modern riding troupe, Alan Larson.
Who's this?
This is Finbar, and Finbar has the distinction in the Terma show of being the mount of the Emperor Hadrian.
Oh, really?
And he's got the most magnificent set of recreated 2nd century saddlery on Alice.
Hello, Finbar. And an amazing saddle. I mean, this saddle looks completely different from modern saddles.
Although it's not the most comfortable of saddles, it does the job brilliantly.
And so how do you know what Roman saddles would have been like?
We owe a great debt to a wonderful man called Dr. Peter Connolly, who reconstructed the Roman saddles from the cover, the outer leather cover, which was found preserved in a bog during a dig at a Roman cavalry camp. He had the genius moment of realizing that if you put a frame inside it, It could function perfectly well.
And I noticed that Finbar hasn't got any stirrups.
No.
So is that normal for Roman riding?
Roman cavalry saddles do not have stirrups. They didn't need them, essentially. They were so well wedged into the saddle with these 4 horns that they were able to do everything that a modern rider can do.
And what about the horses themselves, Alan? What would they have been like? Were they very different to modern horses?
Yeah, the Roman cavalry horses were small by our standards. Finbar is 15 hands, and that's as big as Roman cavalry horses got.
So were they choosing to have small horses, or was that just all that was available?
No, that was all that was available. The majority of them are what we'd call ponies. But the good news about that is that a sure-footed, sturdy little pony can carry you for miles and miles, days and days, up and down hills, in country that a bigger, more finely bred horse would begin to falter.
On these small, rugged horses, a cavalryman could travel 40 miles in a day. Selecting the right horses is also going to be crucial for the 30 modern reenactors, who are taking on the huge challenge of staging a Roman cavalry tournament. A month before the big show, troop leader Alan Larson is bringing together 6 key riders and their horses for a vital first training session. In the Roman age, cavalry tournaments were designed to showcase the horseman's skills in a public arena. These 6 riders are taking on the role of the elite who starred in the highlight of the tournament, a competition of horsemanship fought between 2 teams.
It's undoubtedly one of the most challenging of equestrian and reenactment disciplines. And a relatively few number of riders have the skills and determination to see it through.
Historians have pieced together what they know about Roman cavalry tournaments from the ancient literature, but this project will allow them to examine the cavalry's equipment in action, as well as to better understand the tactics and manoeuvres they've only ever read about. At today's session, the team needs to practice 3 of these manoeuvres, which they'll eventually be performing at the show. Before they begin, Nigel, the lead rider, calls the team together for a briefing to discuss the first task, the so-called Cantabrian wheel.
OK, everybody happy with their horses? Right, what we're going to do first, while we're in modern clothing and modern tack, is start putting together the basis of that Cantabrian wheel. OK, so in that, Magyar and Shadow will be the target horses, and you 4 will be riding around, pelting our shields with your javelins.
The Cantabrian wheel was a classic Roman battle tactic, which was practiced as part of the cavalry tournament. On the battlefield, it was designed to harass enemy forces, but in the tournament, the cavalrymen scored points by hitting their opponents with blunted javelins.
Good hit. Bad shot.
We're putting the horses and the riders through their paces. They're concentrating on the business of hurling javelins at each other in a competition, which will be as much of a spectacle now as it was in the early 2nd century AD.
Nice, Mark. Nice. I didn't actually mean to hit your camera then.
The modern riders are discovering firsthand that Roman cavalry tournaments were probably also a key part of training soldiers for war. With one exercise under their belts, they'll now attempt 2 other disciplines from the Roman cavalry tournament. The pursuit, in which one rider attacks and then flees, defending their back with their shield. And the charge, which is like a medieval joust, where 2 riders meet in a clash of javelins at speed. But during the charge, the team gets a taste of just how tough Roman cavalry riding can be.
Guys, Lucy's off. Lucy's off.
Okay.
Lucy is winded by the fall, but nothing is broken.
I'm feeling okay, bruised, but I'll be fine.
So you're going to get back in the saddle?
I'm going to get back in the saddle. Yep, that's what we do. We fall off, we get back in the saddle.
The riders are relying heavily on their recreated Roman saddles, and Lucy's accident has highlighted that they're testing these things to their limits, and they'll need to improve them.
So this is the point at which the saddle is attached. The girth is where we tie the girth on, and there isn't one on this side. It is here. So that's what happened. That should be there. It just ripped under the pressure. So this is going to need a good repair before we actually get to the event.
The elite riders won't practice again as a group until they meet in Carlisle for the event, when they'll have to work with 24 other riders as a complete Roman troupe. There's still a long way to go before they can stage a successful tournament.
Every piece of equipment you put on makes it more difficult. The visibility was a bit of a problem at times. It is tiring, very, very tiring. I'm very, very tired.
From ancient records, we know that there would have been around 10,000 cavalrymen in Britain at any one time. But not all of them were stationed on Hadrian's Wall. There was in fact a network of cavalry forts located across the north, all designed to help Romans control the local population. One of the most important cavalry bases in northern Britain was built at Ribchester near modern Preston in 70 AD, and currently archaeologists are uncovering new clues about who those cavalrymen actually were. Since 2015, a team from the University of Central Lancashire has been running this new dig at Ribchester. Much of the fort now lies under the modern village, so the team has opened a trench in a back garden. They've revealed a number of the cavalry fort's buildings and are beginning to understand the fort's layout. But they're also starting to find small clues that can tell them more about where the men who lived here came from. Dig co-director Duncan Sayer is examining an intriguing piece of pottery the team has found.
Under this bucket, we have a vaulting tube. This would have been a much larger object that comes around out here somewhere, has a tube on one end, and then it has a socket on the other. And you can see on this here, it just has slightly more of a curve on this side than it does on this side. And so when you put lots and lots and lots and lots of those together, then it creates an arch. What's quite nice about this is these things are seen only in North Africa and at Chester's Roman fort. And that's really interesting because the Spanish cavalry came here first and then they moved on to Chester's. And so somewhere there would be these gently domed buildings, which is, I think, quite nice and would have looked really quite exotic and even out of place in rural Lancashire.
This fort was first manned by a Spanish cavalry regiment who must have brought this exotic architecture with them. Cavalrymen were recruited from conquered tribes across the Roman Empire, from places like France, Spain, the Netherlands, Eastern Europe, Syria and North Africa. But as well as finding clues about who these men were, the team is also finding incredible personal artefacts that give us a glimpse into daily life here. While they take a break, Duncan Sayer is meeting finds specialist Justine Biddle to examine some of the most recently discovered objects.
What is this, Justine?
So this is what's known as a terret ring that would be part of our horse's bridle fitting.
OK, so where would that fit around the...
It would go on the cheek.
That's all there?
Yeah, exactly
Okay,
there.
okay.
And you'd have one part of the reins would be going, or one part of the harness would be going back towards the head and holding the harness in position.
That's really interesting. So it really gives us that evidence of ridden horses.
No, absolutely.
In Ribchester, which is what you'd expect, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly.
And then one of the best pieces of dating evidence on a Roman site is just that you expect to find loads of coins, especially in military sites.
It's a silver denarius of the Emperor Vespasian.
There he is.
It's got a dolphin and an anchor on the reverse side of it, and that was minted between 79 and 89 AD.
Probably comes over and is lost from the pocket or from the pouch of a Roman cavalry soldier.
Yeah, almost certainly.
He'd have been a bit annoyed about losing that.
He would have been really cross about losing that. That's quite a lot of money that's just fallen into the ditch.
But it's not only digs that can reveal new information about who the cavalrymen were, and sometimes these clues can be found in the most unexpected places.
This is Hexham Abbey. The original church here was one of the oldest in Britain, but I'm after something even more ancient, and that's one of the most striking traces that we have of the Roman cavalry.
When the original Saxon church was built here at Hexham, much of the stone used was robbed from nearby Roman buildings. During renovation work in the 19th century, workers discovered a huge flagstone in the floor. When it was lifted, it turned out to be a Roman cavalry tombstone. To find out more about it, I'm meeting Lindsay Allison-Jones of Newcastle University.
Lindsay, this is a magnificent tombstone. It's absolutely huge. Who is this we're looking at?
Well, this is a man called Flavinus, who was a standard bearer in the cavalry regiment of Petriana. And you can see he's holding the standard there.
So he was presumably very well known. He was high status to have something like this as his grave marker.
This has been an extremely expensive gravestone. It's got an enormous amount of decoration and detail. And you can see all the detail of the horse, you can see the horse's mane, you can see all the reins and the trappings here.
All those horse trappings that we find archaeologically, and you know, here they are.
There they are,
displayed.
yes indeed. Yeah.
Tombstones like this have been invaluable in revealing what a cavalryman looked like. They show us how things like the horse tack and the weapons were actually worn. But this tombstone can also reveal more about this particular man's identity and how cavalrymen wanted to be remembered.
He's shown in heroic pose, galloping away, but poor old barbarian he's slain is not in heroic pose. He's being booted up the backside, but he's still hanging onto his sword and fighting back to the end.
But being trampled underfoot.
Absolutely, yes.
So what do we know about this man, other than that he's obviously in the cavalry?
Well, the inscription at the bottom tells us his name is Flavinus, but he's only got the one name, which suggests he's not a Roman citizen. It's possible that he came from Gaul or from Spain.
And it's interesting that he's shown trampling a barbarian, but if, as you say, he may have been a Celt, he may have been a Gaul, then, his family would have been barbarians just a couple of generations back.
Yes, well, one man's barbarian is another man's neighbour, but this is an artistic trope. This is the way cavalrymen like to be shown.
Wherever they came from, once these men were part of the Roman army, they seem to have embraced their new roles wholeheartedly.
The impression this tombstone gives is that he may have been from a noble family. And if you were a young man with heroic bent who was keen on horses, then becoming a cavalryman in the Roman army was the best way to really live your life in the way you wanted to.
There is an element of if you can't beat them, join them, isn't there?
Oh, yes, I think so, yes. Yes. And, of course, he would have been very well paid as well, able to afford all this bling.
The cavalrymen were the elite of the Roman army, and this status drew young men from across the Roman Empire, even from conquered peoples, into their ranks. And now, having seen cavalry kit depicted on a tombstone and pieces recovered archaeologically, I want to see what they looked like on the men and their horses in the flesh. And to do that, I'm joining Nigel, who'll be leading the elite riders in the show, and who's also an amateur historian of cavalry.
Nigel, you've got some of the kit ready here. Talk me through it.
Well, let's start with the first piece of protection. The important thing is the mail. And like most things Roman, it's not Roman. So it's been adopted from the Gallic tribes.
Can I see how heavy that is? Oh,
Yeah. I haven't weighed it, but I think it's around 11, 12 kilos.
it must be at least that. God, that's a huge weight to be carrying around before you start to load up with all the weapons themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, once it's on your body and a load is spread, you don't notice it as much.
Yeah. Okay, so you're wearing 12 kilos worth of chainmail, and then you're carrying a shield as well. So that looks
which equally
pretty heavy.
is quite heavy. A bit of that.
Yeah. So you wear that. Oh, how do you wear that? This on.
We are using these two straps. These are not correct.
Yeah.
Okay, no evidence for strapping like that, but because we're using modern horses and riding in a modern style, we've got to compromise.
Yeah.
Our best guess from all of the evidence is that actually they are holding the shield in a centre grip.
Oh, right.
With the reins in the same hand. Part of the problem you're getting as well is that weight means that you are always unbalanced on the horse. And what we're starting to find after a couple of days is that we're all getting a lot of pressure on the right side of our groin, and that's because we're counterbalancing that weight by putting more pressure on the right side of the horse.
Yeah.
So we're tiring our right leg more than our left leg.
What the elite Roman cavalry were most famous for was their masked helmets. Many of these remarkable objects have been discovered across Europe, and these finds have provided templates for Nigel and his team's modern recreations. But archaeologists have never been sure if these elaborate helmets were just for show, or whether they could have been used in combat.
Some of these helmets, like this sports helmet here, is a perfectly functioning cavalry helmet.
Yeah.
The only thing that's different is the addition of the face mask. Now, if that face mask is made to fit the cavalryman's face, absolutely fine. Better visibility than the later medieval helmet, and the effect psychologically on an enemy would be tremendous.
There's something quite scary about them, that expressionless face, I think.
Yeah. But the idea that, you know, it inhibits you so much that, you know, they're impractical for use, well, we'll be demonstrating that's not the case.
Can I try one?
Absolutely.
So do you put one of these on first?
Yep.
Okay, let's try this.
Okay, it should go straight on.
Oh yeah, it's quite a snug fit actually.
Yeah. Well, it needs to be. What you can't have is it moving, because that's when you'll be blind.
Yeah.
So it needs to be, you need to get used to the discomfort of having it firmly fixed over your face.
I'm not even moving in here, Nigel, and it's getting a bit hot and sweaty already.
Yeah.
Just from my breathing. I'm going to take that off. Ugh. It's amazing to know so much detail, isn't it? A lot of this is kind of working out what works, you know, what kind of padding you need, how it all fits together, how it all works together, and you can only really do that by trying it out.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to the term of this afternoon, but I've already started to learn a lot more about the Roman cavalry from talking to the archaeologists, and about how important this experimental archaeology is when suddenly all of their research gets tested, gets put into practice. How does it feel and how does it work to put on all of that armour, all of that kit, get on a horse and ride out into battle?
What made the elite Roman cavalry such feared warriors wasn't just access to the best kit available, but a gruelling training regime. But the modern riders who are putting on the cavalry tournament have to cram their Roman cavalry training into just one session the day before the performance. For the first time, all 30 horses and riders are in one place. They need to gel as a unit and perfect a difficult manoeuvre that's a key part of the show.
This is one of the most challenging things that I've done. Technically, it's hugely difficult, bringing together this number of horses and riders for the first time to try and do justice to what was an elite military force.
All riders, please!
When we go out next, we're going to go out as we are. We're going to go out with shields and with spears. We're going to do some basic drill with the whole terma together. So we're going to make our way down. We're going to come into the arena in files, a blue file and a red file. I'm then going to take us through some basic drill around the arena, which, as you know, is the basis of the show this afternoon. My primary concern is always got to be the horses and keeping them happy and healthy. You've also got to be aware of how hard you can push men to achieve the result. Morale is crucial.
Based on ancient literature, it's thought that a terma, the Latin for troop, was made up of 30 horsemen. The key thing to perfect in the rehearsal is a wield, where the whole terma will ride around the arena in 2 ranks, at a trot and then at a canter. It's a complex and difficult manoeuvre to choreograph.
You learn a lot about how they must have done it in Roman times, because when you try this stuff yourself, you understand a whole set of just small practical details, but they add up. And that's something we think about training the men, the cavalry men, but in some ways they're much less important than training the cavalry horses together. So you learn all sorts of things, as well as small details of tack and kit and so on. And a lot of the skills really must have taken years of practice to get perfected. We're playing catch-up. They had it, they were the masters, and we're playing catch-up.
Both looking forward to it and a bit nervous about it. I think this is the most nervous I've been about a reenactment. I do so many of them each year, but this one seems to be a higher stakes, and we have more to prove or more that can go wrong.
I really feel I'm beginning to build up a picture of who these Roman cavalrymen were. I've seen how they rode, how they trained, and how they dressed. But I want to discover more about what their own experiences were like here on the fringes of the Roman Empire. And to do that, I'm visiting a place where you can almost disappear back into the Roman past. It's so fresh and visceral. It's called Vindolanda, and it's one of the most important archaeological sites in Britain. It was a Roman military fort, which was in use for centuries. In fact, there were 9 different forts here, all built one on top of another. When digging began here in the 1970s, it was discovered that the deep levels were amazingly well preserved, because they were waterlogged and contained very little oxygen. This lack of oxygen meant that organic objects which usually decay in the ground had been preserved. Things like wood, bone and leather survive in almost perfect condition at Vindolanda. It seems I've picked just about the worst day to visit this digging season. Torrential rain has meant that the excavations have been abandoned. That doesn't matter, because I'm most interested in seeing some of the small finds that have emerged from this extraordinary site over the years. And to see what these finds from Vindolanda can tell us about the cavalry and their lives on the northern frontier, I'm on my way to the museum's stores to meet curator Barbara Burley.
Barbara, it's always astonishing to see the preservation of things like leather at Vindolanda. What was this leather object?
Well, we know by kind of looking at all of the different fragments that it's actually part of a horse's chamfron, which is a ceremonial head mask that they wear. And if you start to look at this piece here, it's the kind of telltale shape of the horse's ear.
And is this possibly the edge of an eye hole there?
Exactly, yeah. So that would be where the horse's eye would come through, and you would have something like a decorated kind of eye guard.
Yeah.
And so it was highly decorated. Beautiful, beautiful piece.
This find and several others have allowed the team here to reconstruct a cavalry chamfron. The incredible preservation at Vindolanda also led to one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. During one of the first digging seasons here, in 1973, the site director Robin Burley was working in one of the deep levels when he discovered small fragments of wood with writing on them. What he'd found were Roman writing tablets, letters, accounts, and official documents from the fort. Once out of the ground, the writing began to disappear almost immediately, so they were sent to specialists who photographed them with infrared cameras, which revealed the vanished text. These documents have given us a unique insight into life on the northern frontier. But what's often overlooked is that many of them are written by or about the cavalrymen. In one famous letter, which seems to be an intelligence report for Vindolanda cavalrymen, we learn about the enemy they had to face.
The Britons are unprotected by armour. There are very many cavalry. The cavalry do not use swords, nor do the wretched Britons mount in order to throw javelins.
After years of research, Barbara and her team are also starting to discover personal stories about individual cavalrymen from the Vindolanda letters. And you've got some reproductions here of a couple of the wonderful Vindolanda letters. What are these referring to?
Well, the letters and the writing tablets give us such a good idea of the actual people here. Both of these are accounts, and they talk about a single individual. His name is Tagamas, and he's from the Vardulian Cavalry, and his name is just across here.
It's difficult to make out,
It
isn't
is
it?
very
Yeah.
difficult. But the interesting thing about this particular letter is it says Tagamas's companion. Now, if that was a man, you would just put his name. So the idea is that it was his common law wife, because at this period on the site, they weren't allowed to marry. This one here, again, talks about Tagamas, and he's right here, and he's a vexillarius, which means that he is the standard bearer for the Varduli cavalry.
Yeah.
And here he's purchasing lances, common cavalry equipment, so it's not hugely surprising. But his story goes further, because not only do we have him in the tablets, but we also have him on this amphora handle. So you can just see Tagamas. Tagamas. Whatever was in here, and we think it was olive stewed in wine, he didn't trust his fellow officers because he had to write his name on his precious imported food.
Yeah.
So you start to build up these pictures that he was married, that he, he has his friends and what he's ordering and what he's doing. Also that he likes his food. He's got enough money to import food that normally grow in Northumberland. So you're starting to really build up this lovely picture of who these people are.
I've been trying to get a better picture of the Roman cavalry, and it's here at Vindolanda that I feel that it's finally coming into focus, that we have this wonderful evidence, written evidence of precisely which troops were garrisoned here. But actually we're homing right in, and we have the name of this one man who we know is the standard bearer for his troop.
For much of the Roman occupation, the cavalry at places like Vindolanda were here to suppress our ancient ancestors. But over the centuries of Roman rule, that relationship evolved, and they began to put down roots. 30 miles south of Hadrian's Wall, at Binchester, County Durham, archaeologists are working at the site of another cavalry fort. And they're finding evidence that it wasn't just cavalrymen living here, but their families too. The team is from Durham University, and they're excavating the fort's cemetery, but they're facing an uphill struggle. The soil conditions mean that little survives in this ground. Leading the dig is Dr. David Petts.
One of the troubles we've been fighting is the soil's really acid. So normally when you're looking for a cemetery, you would find bones that would tell you it's a grave. Instead, we just have things like this, 6-foot-long pits, which most of the time contain virtually nothing in them.
But by chance, in one corner of the trench, the team has found a skeleton that has survived the acid soil conditions. It might be able to give the team some insights into the people who lived here.
And we can see some of the bones survive, bits of a skull, bits of a jaw, lower jaw you can see. What we will be able to do is get a lot of information from the teeth. And we can look at the chemistry of those teeth, and they tell us quite a lot of information. So they'll tell us about things like their diet, so proportion of meat and vegetables which these people were eating. And that's quite interesting, because we might expect the soldiers to have better diets than the civilians. There's also potential to tell us even broadly where these people came from. So is it someone who's born and brought up here, or is it someone who came from another part of Roman Britain or elsewhere in the Roman Empire? So by looking at the teeth, doing stuff back in the lab, we can draw a remarkable amount of information, even from a quite poorly preserved skeleton like this.
These results will be another useful piece of the jigsaw puzzle to help archaeologists understand who was living at this fort in late Roman Britain. In another area of the site, one of the archaeologists has made a discovery which adds weight to the idea that the fort contained not only the soldiers, but their families. It's a child's grave.
So we've now got 2 beads have come out of this little feature, but I think because we're getting this little group of beads, suggests it's a child's grave.
Even though no bones have survived here, this pit is most likely to have been a grave, and these beads would have accompanied the child's body.
What's clear here is we've got all parts of society, so it's not just for soldiers, but it's their children, because you've got children's graves, it's presumably their wives, because you've got adult graves with female jewellery. A fort like this, it's not just isolated soldiers in the middle of nowhere. They're the people who make the empire bigger and protect it, but they're marrying with the people who generations ago they actually conquered. And it's really lovely to think about how these populations worked.
In Carlisle, the final preparations are being made for the big show. But having 30 riders altogether is a unique opportunity for the archaeologists. And so they've decided to ask Alan and his riders to test out some of their theories about the cavalry that go beyond the tournament itself. They want to try to answer a key question about how the cavalry fought and discover if a certain battle formation they've read about in ancient literature can actually be performed in real life. I'm joining archaeologist and event organiser Bill Griffiths to see if Alan and his team can provide some answers.
So what are the main research questions for you then? What would you really like to find out today?
No one's done this before, put 30 riders in full kit in a field.
Really?
No one's done it. Well, the Romans did.
Yeah, yeah.
Not since. And with the proper authentic kit, with the stirrupless saddles, all these kinds of things. And we just want to see if we can learn some new data about how these cavalrymen rode, what it was like to ride in a unit, what it's like to ride in formation.
Bill and the other archaeologists want to see how the Roman cavalry might have attacked their British enemies.
There are some literary texts that describe Roman cavalry drill, but all we've got is the words.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we've been interpreting the words. Now, are we interpreting them right? Actually, once you have the horses with you, you can start to play about and say, well, actually, you can do this, you can't do that.
Alan and his riders are going to attempt to create a battle formation called the Wedge. The archaeologists think this might have been used to attack enemy formations, sowing panic in their ranks.
So we're now assembling the cuneo, the wedge.
Great.
Yeah, and we'll see how that goes.
Fantastic.
So is this a battle formation?
This is a battle formation. I mean, sometimes the cavalry describe the cuneus, which is the wedge. So it's just form a triangle to break into the ranks of your enemy.
The riders carefully form up in ranks to create a wedge shape.
So this is the wedge formation, this is the cuneo cantering.
Yeah.
And they're holding it together. That's amazing, Bill.
Yeah. Just first time they're out and they've done it. Nailed it.
That's
so
fantastic.
It proves it's possible.
Yeah. It's quite terrifying, actually, standing here as they're coming towards us.
We're at the side of it. Imagine that coming straight at you.
Yeah.
You know, that would be a terrifying sight. And, you know, your first instinct is going to be to run away.
Alan and his team have managed to recreate something that hasn't been seen for over 1,600 years. And the academics have been able to prove that it was easily possible for the Roman cavalry to attack their enemies using the cuneus or wedge formation. But the cavalry weren't just the most feared soldiers in the Roman army. From ancient literature, we also know they were the best paid, outstripping even the citizen soldiers of the legions. To see for myself what their huge pay packets were spent on, I'm back at Chester's Roman fort on Hadrian's Wall. I'm meeting Francis McIntosh of English Heritage, who's been re-examining the archaeological collection at Chester's, which was dug up in the Victorian era. The objects in the museum here really highlight just how wealthy and powerful the Roman cavalry were in Britain.
So these objects were excavated more than a century ago?
That's right. So John Clayton inherited the big mansion house at Chester's in the 1830s, and he had Chester's Roman fort in his front garden. So he excavated there nearly every year until he died in 1890.
So we've got all of these fantastic objects from those excavations, but you've been taking another look at them, haven't you?
Scholarship's changed a huge amount in that amount of time. We've learned a lot. There's been a lot more finds which give us different information. So one of the things related to the cavalry that we're able to discover is that these beads here that have always been presumed to be kind of jewellery, we now know from finds they've been strung on harness.
So you have made new discoveries by revisiting these old finds?
Exactly. Yeah. So even though I wasn't excavating, you know, I was kind of excavating the boxes and finding out new things. It's been really exciting.
And these things look as though they would hang down off the horse.
That's right. So these are some of the pendants that we have. This one's a really nice example because it has the hook pretty much complete. And if you see the design there is 2 dolphins.
Oh, yeah. So that would have been very bright and golden, hanging down off the harness and jingling.
Yeah, and glittering, catching the sun. Makes the horsemen look very impressive and sound very impressive when they're advancing.
Now, this is a beautiful thing. What's that?
It is. So this is a decorative element. It's a stud. You need to see it close up to get the real idea of the amazing decoration. It's absolutely gorgeous. It would have been mounted on harness. And imagine the metal is bright and shiny, and it's got this millefiori enamel.
So this is glass?
That's right. So it's
embedded
those
in it.
rods that are twisted together to make the pattern, then stretched and stretched until it's tiny, and then you salami slice it and set it in.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's absolutely gorgeous. And the other Romans and other people in Britain would appreciate how expensive that was and the work that had gone into that. So it's all about the image and projecting the fact that you're a cavalryman, you're paid more, you can afford to decorate your horse.
Oh, they'd looked amazing, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
It is the afternoon of the big show in Carlisle. All the training and practice the modern riders have put in is going to be put to the test in front of a paying audience. And for the archaeologists, it's a unique opportunity to see their theories and assumptions put to the test.
Events like this are always useful because however much theorising you do about things, once you actually see what can be done with a horse and a rider, you have a much better idea of what the ancient texts are saying, and that's so much more valuable.
Backstage, the riders are readying the horses and checking and rechecking their kit. As the audience begins to stream into the arena, I'm going behind the scenes to see the final preparations for myself.
How's it going, Nigel? You nearly ready?
Yeah. It's been really hard road. I think it surprised us all, you know, just how tough it was going to be.
Yeah. Hasn't stopped yet, though?
No.
So we're minutes away, aren't we?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
I've lost all track of time, to be honest. So, I'm just waiting for the order.
There's an incredible sense of excitement just bubbling under the surface here, and the riders are just about to set off into the arena. I'm going to go in and take my seat. I cannot wait.
I'm going to be watching the action unfold in the company of Bill Griffiths, who, along with the other experts here, has spent years waiting for this moment. In Roman times, these events were competitions where riders battled it out for glory and reward in front of the emperor and the crowd. And to recreate some of that atmosphere today, the crowd has been split into 2 teams, red and blue.
You're on the red side, I'm on the blue side.
Yeah, you're wearing a blue top as well, so yeah, I got red. Yeah.
That's it.
Hey! that's my team. No, definitely not.
Oh, that's one for me, I think. Already on the cheers.
Hey!
The first part of the show sees the legionaries of the Ermine Street Guard strutting their stuff. Then it's time for Alan, Nigel and all 30 riders to take centre stage.
So they're walking the troop round the arena at the moment. Yeah. What are they going to be doing?
Well, you're going to see them start to form the Cantabrian circles and then bring out the best of the troops to demonstrate their prowess and skill at arms in front of their emperor, competing for his favour.
Nigel and the other elite riders take their positions for the first part of the competition. 3 are carrying red shields and 3 are carrying blue shields. They'll try to score points for their team by hitting their opponent's shields with blunted javelins.
We should have a bet on this. Are you willing to bet 2 denarii?
The first test is the Cantabrian wheel. All the training and hard work has paid off, and even wearing those restrictive face masks, the team manages to hit their targets at speed.
Blue team, 3 points! Oh, 3 to me.
Next is the charge, which is like a medieval joust, but with thrown javelins. And finally, the pursuit. One rider attacks and then is chased down by the victim.
Well done. It was a fair contest.
And as a final send-off to the crowd, the full troop of 30 Roman cavalry riders gallops past in unison. It's an awe-inspiring sight and a reminder that these tournaments were used to demonstrate Roman power to our ancient ancestors.
So, Bill, what have you learned from this weekend?
Just huge amounts. I mean, one, just actually how relatively easy some of the drill is that we thought wasn't.
Yeah.
How quickly riders can pick up some of that drill. How important this training, this spectacle is for the training of the army. There was a lot of debate. Is it just a show for the emperor? But you can see by going through it, it's really about developing the horsemanship of the soldiers for battle, for contact with the enemy. And also, it does give you that real sense, doesn't it, of that imperial power and might and majesty, projecting the power of imperial Rome.
So there's a lot of people sticking around after the show itself and learning more about the Roman era. And what a fantastic way to engage a wide audience with this period in our history. And the archaeologists themselves have learned a lot from this experience. For me, I found it impressive, but I also found it quite intimidating. There was that power of the Roman army brought to life, but it's a symbol of oppression as well. It's a really interesting double-edged sword, I think.
For the reenactors, archaeologists and audience alike, this has been a unique opportunity to relive something that no one's seen for over 1,600 years.
This restaging of a Roman tournament has been a magnificent spectacle, but actually it's more than that. It's about research as well, because it's allowed the archaeologists to test out some of their ideas. And informing everything that's been achieved by this project has been the tireless work of historians and archaeologists at digs, museums, and in the archives. Each new clue they've unearthed has helped bring the Roman cavalry back to life and returned them to their rightful place at the centre of the story of Roman Britain. But it's a process that's not over yet. Across Hadrian's Wall and beyond, new discoveries will continue to build our knowledge of these forgotten horsemen.